In the heart of the Valley of Mexico, a people once rose from nothing to build one of the most dazzling civilizations the world has ever known. They built floating gardens that fed an empire, temples that touched the heavens, and a city, Tenochtitlán, that left even hardened conquistadors in awe. This is the story of the Aztec Empire, a story of brilliance and blood, of gods and warriors, of poetry and sacrifice. It is a tale of a clash of civilizations, where Spanish steel and disease brought tragedy to a people who believed they were sustaining the sun itself. Across 20 chapters, we will witness their rise, their golden age, their battles, their fall, and the enduring legacy that still beats at the heart of modern Mexico. Welcome to History Teller YT. Stay with us, for this is not just history. It is a journey through destiny, tragedy, and survival. By the end, you'll see why the Aztecs are remembered not as victims, but as a civilization whose spirit refuses to die. Long before the world came to know the name Aztec, their ancestors lived in the shadows of myth and memory. The people who would one day rule central Mexico believed that their origin lay in a distant, mystical land called Aztlán, a place often described as a paradise of lakes, fertile valleys, and radiant skies. Aztlán was not simply a geographic memory. It was a spiritual homeland, a symbol of divine destiny. According to tradition, the gods commanded these wandering people to leave their comfort behind and begin a long migration that would test their courage, endurance, and unity. This journey was not only physical, but deeply spiritual, each step carrying them closer to fulfilling their sacred purpose. Guided by priests who read the signs of the heavens and interpreted the will of the gods, the people carried with them their most precious idols and sacred fire. They passed through deserts, forests, and mountains, often facing hunger, drought, and attacks from rival tribes. Yet the migration was also filled with miracles and visions. Stories tell of supernatural guidance, omens in the sky, strange animals appearing at crossroads, and dreams that foretold where they must go next. Each trial hardened them, forging a community bound together not merely by blood, but by shared destiny. As the generations passed, the wandering Mexica, as they called themselves, arrived in the Valley of Mexico, a basin surrounded by volcanic mountains and glittering lakes. But the valley was already home to powerful peoples, the Tepanecs, the Acalua, and the descendants of the Toltecs, who looked upon the Mexica as crude outsiders. At first, the Mexica were forced to live as mercenaries and laborers, offering their services as fierce warriors in exchange for survival. They were often scorned as uncivilized, their migration stories mocked as superstition. But deep in their hearts, the Mexica clung to the prophecy given by the gods, that one day they would find the promised land where they were destined to rise as rulers, not wanderers. Thus, the migration from Aztlán was more than a movement of people. It was the forging of identity, the memory of hardship, of hunger, of exile, and of divine command gave the Aztecs their unshakable sense of purpose. They were not simply another tribe. They were a chosen people, walking toward history with the weight of prophecy behind them. When the Mexica finally reached the Great Basin of lakes in central Mexico, they were still outsiders, tolerated but not respected. The other city-states saw them as brash warriors, skilled in battle but lacking refinement. For many years they lived on the margins, sometimes even forced on a swampy, inhospitable land. But what others saw as a curse, the Mexica turned into destiny. According to their prophecy, the gods had promised to reveal their true homeland with a miraculous sign, an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a serpent. The sign would mark the place where they must build their city, the heart of their empire. The moment came around 1325 on a small, swampy island in Lake Texcoco. There, the Mexico witnessed the divine vision, an eagle spreading its wings atop a cactus, sunlight gleaming on its feathers, clutching a snake in its beak. For them, this was not a coincidence. It was the fulfillment of centuries of wandering. With determination, they began to build their city in the most unlikely of places, a patch of marshland surrounded by water, far from fertile fields or safe trade routes. To outsiders, it seemed absurd, but to the Mexica, it was sacred ground. The founding of Tenochtitlan was not simply the birth of a city. It was the birth of a destiny. They drove wooden stakes into the marsh, laid foundations of stone, and built causeways to connect their island to the mainland. Over time, they transformed the swamps into gardens, the waters into highways, and the island into a glittering jewel at the heart of the valley. Their resilience turned disadvantage into strength. The lake itself became their protector, a natural defense against invasion. The founding myth of Tenochtitlan carried deep meaning. The eagle, cactus, and serpent symbolized not only survival, but also cosmic balance. Life and death, earth and sky, struggle and triumph. To this day, the emblem remains immortalized on a modern flag of Mexico. What began as a desperate settlement on an island would soon rise into one of the most astonishing cities of the pre-Columbian world, a city of temples, markets, palaces, and gardens that dazzled even the Spanish conquerors who later destroyed it. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The Mexica had found their home. The story of the eagle and the cactus is more than a tale of founding. It is the essence of Aztec identity. Myths were the lifeblood of the Aztec world, shaping how they understood themselves, their gods, and their destiny. To the Aztecs, history was not just a sequence of events, but part of a cosmic cycle, a drama in which human actions reflected divine will. Their myths told them that the universe had been created and destroyed multiple times, that suns had risen and fallen, and that the current age, the fifth sun, was fragile, requiring constant nourishment through sacrifice and devotion. Within this framework, the vision of the eagle was not just a sign of where to build. It was a cosmic confirmation that the Mexica were chosen to sustain the fifth sun. Their city, Tenochtitlan, would not only be a political capital, but also a sacred center where heaven and earth intersected. Every temple they built, every ritual they performed, carried the weight of this cosmic duty. The myth transformed their swampy island into the axis of the world, the point upon which the balance of the cosmos rested. Prophecies also guided their leaders. Priests interpreted the movement of stars, eclipses, comets, and dreams to predict the fate of their people. When droughts struck or enemies threatened, the people turned to these prophecies for reassurance or warning. To the Aztecs, the divine realm was never distant. It was intertwined with daily life. The myth of the eagle and cactus reminded them that hardship was part of their destiny, but so too was greatness. Even their enemies came to recognize the power of this narrative, for it gave the Mexica unyielding confidence in their mission. The story of the eagle and the cactus is more than a tale of founding. It is the essence of Aztec identity. Myths were the lifeblood of the Aztec world, shaping how they understood themselves, their gods, and their destiny. To the Aztecs, history was not just a sequence of events, but part of a cosmic cycle, a drama in which human actions reflected divine will. Their myths told them that the universe had been created and destroyed multiple times, that suns had risen and fallen, and that the current age, the fifth sun, was fragile, requiring constant nourishment through sacrifice and devotion. Within this framework, The vision of the eagle was not just a sign of where to build. It was a cosmic confirmation that the Mexica were chosen to sustain the fifth sun. Their city, Tenochtitlan, would not only be a political capital, but also a sacred center where heaven and earth intersected. Every temple they built, every ritual they performed, carried the weight of this cosmic duty. The myth transformed their swampy island into the axis of the world, the point upon which the balance of the cosmos rested. Prophecies also guided their leaders. Priests interpreted the movement of stars, eclipses, comets, and dreams to predict the fate of their people. When drought struck or enemies threatened, the people turned to these prophecies for reassurance or warning. To the Aztecs, the divine realm was never distant. It was intertwined with daily life. The myth of the eagle and cactus reminded them that hardship was part of their destiny, but so too was greatness. Even their enemies came to recognize the power of this narrative, for it gave the Mexica unyielding confidence in their mission. The enduring power of this myth can still be felt today. It reflects a universal truth about civilizations, that stories and symbols can bind people together more strongly than weapons or wealth. For the Aztecs, the eagle on the cactus was not just a legend. It was proof of divine favor, a beacon of resilience, and a promise of empire. From humble wanderers, the Mexica had become the builders of destiny, ready to rise toward glory. The Aztec Empire was not only a military powerhouse, but also a carefully organized society with a structure that balanced power, duty, and privilege. At the top stood the Huey-Teotlani, the emperor, whose authority was both political and divine. He was regarded as the great speaker, a leader chosen not only to rule, but also to embody the will of the gods. His power extended over alliances, wars, laws, and a vast tribute system that sustained the empire. Beneath him stood a council of nobles, advisors, and priests who guided major decisions, ensuring that the state remained aligned with both political necessity and cosmic order. The nobility, Pippleton, formed the next layer of society. These were the elite families, often descended from the first settlers of Tenochtitlan, who held positions as military commanders, governors, judges, and priests. Their wealth and privileges were sustained by land grants, tribute, and access to higher education. Yet their lives were not merely comfortable. They were expected to uphold high standards of discipline, bravery, and learning, serving as role models for the rest of society. Beneath the nobles were the commoners, Massahualtin, who made up the vast majority of the population. They were farmers, artisans, traders, and laborers who sustained the empire's economy. Despite their lower status, commoners had important rights. They could own land, join military service, and rise in status through acts of bravery in war. This mobility gave the Aztec system a unique balance between rigidity and opportunity. A commoner who captured enemies in battle could be elevated to noble status, blurring the boundaries between classes through valor and achievement. At the bottom of the hierarchy were the slaves, Tlacotin. But unlike the image of slavery in other civilizations, Aztec slavery was not always permanent or hereditary. Many slaves were debtors or criminals who entered servitude as punishment or necessity, and they could buy back their freedom or be freed through acts of service. Some even held property and could marry. This system reflected the Aztec belief in balance. Even at the lowest levels of society, there were opportunities for renewal and redemption. This layered hierarchy was reinforced by religion and tradition. Every class had obligations not only to the state, but also to the gods, ensuring that social structure was seen as part of the cosmic order. The emperor ruled with divine authority. Nobles embodied discipline. commoners provided sustenance, and even slaves played a role in the cycle of duty and sacrifice. In this way, Aztec society was not merely political, but profoundly spiritual, a living reflection of the cosmos they believed they sustained. One of the most striking features of Aztec society was its commitment to universal education, something rare in the ancient world. From childhood, every Aztec, whether noble or commoner, was required to attend school. This reflected the belief that every citizen had a duty to the empire and the gods. Boys and girls received different training, tailored to the roles they were expected to play, but all were taught discipline, respect, and loyalty to the community. There were two main types of schools. The Kalmakak was reserved for the children of nobles. Here, students were trained in religion, astronomy, philosophy, law, and leadership. They were groomed to become priests, judges, diplomats, or high-ranking warriors. The curriculum was rigorous, emphasizing not only intellectual knowledge, but also moral discipline and spiritual devotion. Students in the Kalmakak endured strict rules and harsh punishments, for the stakes were high. They were being prepared to guide the empire itself. The Telpakali, on the other hand, was the school for commoners. Its focus was military training, community service, and practical skills. Boys learned the art of warfare, weapon handling, and the discipline of collective duty. They also performed public works, such as repairing roads and building canals, instilling a sense of service to society. Girls were trained at home or in temple schools, where they learned household management, weaving, childcare, and religious rituals, roles considered vital to the stability of the empire. Warriors occupied a special place in Aztec society. The empire thrived on conquest and tribute, and the capture of enemies was seen as a sacred duty. Warriors could gain great honor by taking prisoners for sacrifice, rising through ranks such as the Jaguar and Eagle warriors, prestigious orders that combined military prowess with religious symbolism. For commoners, warfare provided a path to upward mobility, transforming humble origins into noble recognition. Parallel to the warriors were the priests, the guardians of spiritual balance. They were astronomers, calendar keepers, and ritual experts who determined when wars should be fought, when crops should be planted, and when sacrifices must be performed. They endured harsh lives of fasting, bloodletting, and celibacy, for their duty was to maintain harmony between the human world and the gods. Their knowledge of astronomy and mathematics was advanced, allowing them to predict eclipses and track celestial cycles with remarkable accuracy. Thus, education in Aztec society was not about personal advancement, but about service to the state, to the community, and to the cosmic order. Every citizen was a piece of a larger puzzle, and through training, discipline, and devotion, they helped sustain an empire that saw itself as the center of the universe. Beyond the temples, warriors, and priests, Aztec society thrived on the rhythms of daily life. In the bustling streets of Tenochtitlan, families lived in adobe homes, children played in courtyards, and women wove colorful textiles while men worked the fields. Daily meals reflected the agricultural backbone of the empire. Maize was the staple crop, complemented by beans, squash, chili peppers, and tomatoes. From these, Aztec cooks created tortillas, tamales, and stews that nourished rich and poor alike. Chocolate, made from cacao beans, was considered a divine gift, consumed as a bitter, spiced drink by nobles and warriors to invigorate body and spirit. Trade was the lifeblood of urban life, and nowhere was it more visible than in the grand market of Tlatelolco, often described by Spanish chroniclers with awe. Thousands of merchants gathered daily, offering goods from every corner of the empire. Feathers from tropical birds, obsidian blades, cotton cloth, pottery, jewelry, and food of astonishing variety. The market was not only an economic hub, but also a social and cultural stage, where news was exchanged, alliances forged, and imperial power displayed. Strict laws and officials ensured order, with judges on hand to resolve disputes and punish fraud. Families were the foundation of daily life. Marriage was considered a sacred duty, often arranged with the help of matchmakers who ensured alliances between families. Women played a central role in managing households, weaving textiles, raising children, and participating in rituals. While men were expected to serve as warriors or laborers, women's contributions were equally vital, providing stability and continuity in a society that demanded constant energy for war and worship. Recreation and art also flourished. The Aztecs enjoyed music, poetry, and the ball game tlachtli, a ritual sport with deep symbolic meaning. Festivals filled the calendar, blending joy with devotion, where dancing, singing, and ritual offerings bound the community together. Even in ordinary life, the presence of the divine was never far away. Every hearth was an altar, every meal a gift from the gods, every market transaction part of a sacred cycle of exchange. The daily life of the Aztecs reveals a society that was not only fierce in battle and devout in religion, but also vibrant, creative, and resilient. Their markets, families, and traditions gave texture to the grand narrative of empire. They remind us that behind the towering temples and bloody sacrifices were millions of ordinary men and women whose lives sustained the brilliance of Tenochtitlan. At the very heart of Aztec civilization was religion, a system so vast and intricate that it shaped every aspect of life, from farming and family to war and empire. The Aztecs lived in a cosmos they believed to be fragile, always at risk of collapse unless humans repaid their debt to the gods. Their pantheon was immense, filled with deities who ruled over the elements, the skies, and the fate of humankind. Yet among them, a few stood as pillars of Aztec devotion. Foremost was Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war. To the Aztecs, he was both protector and conqueror, the divine force who had led them on their migration from Aztlán and whose favor sustained their empire. Each sunrise was seen as his daily victory over darkness, but that victory came at a cost. The sun required nourishment, blood, hearts, and devotion to continue its eternal struggle. Thus, Huitzilopochtli was not simply worshipped, he was fed. Alongside him stood Tlaloc, the ancient god of rain, fertility, and storms. Farmers prayed to Tlaloc for the rains that watered the Chinampas, the floating gardens that fed millions. But Tlaloc was unpredictable, capable of sending devastating floods or parching droughts. His dual nature reflected the fragility of life itself. Abundance and destruction were always two sides of the same divine coin. To appease him, offerings of children and tears were made, for the Aztecs believed that the cries of the young called forth the rains. Another central figure was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a god of wind, wisdom, and creation. Unlike Huitzilopochtli, Quetzalcoatl was often associated with mercy and learning. He was credited with giving maize to humanity, teaching writing, calendars, and knowledge. His mythic departure from the world, with a prophecy of return, would later intertwine fatefully with the arrival of the Spaniards, as some believed Hernán Cortés to be his reincarnation. Together, these gods created a spiritual triangle: sun, rain, and wisdom, upon which Aztec life depended. Yet they were only part of a vast pantheon, each deity representing forces that touched daily existence. Xipe-Totec, the flayed god of renewal; Tezcatlipoca, the god of fate and conflict, Coatlicue, the mother of gods. For the Aztecs, divinity was everywhere, woven into every harvest, battle, and birth. Their gods were not distant. They were immediate, demanding, and inseparable from the rhythms of survival. Perhaps no aspect of Aztec religion has generated more fascination, horror, and misunderstanding than the practice of human sacrifice. To the Aztecs, this was not brutality for its own sake, but the highest form of duty, an act that maintained the balance of the cosmos. They believed the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and in return, humans owed a debt of blood to sustain it. Sacrifice was, in their view, an exchange, life given for life preserved. The most dramatic sacrifices took place atop the towering Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan. Captured warriors, honored as offerings, were led up the steps to the temple of Huitzilopochtli. Priests in elaborate costumes, painted in red and black, performed the ritual with solemn precision. The victim's heart was cut out, lifted to the sun, and placed in a sacred vessel, while the body was cast down the temple steps. To the Aztecs, this was not murder, it was transformation. The sacrifice became one with the gods, joining them in eternal struggle against darkness. But human sacrifice was not limited to the battlefield. Agricultural rituals demanded the offering of children to Tlaloc, their tears believed to summon rain. Festivals honored different gods with different forms of sacrifice, sometimes through bloodletting by nobles, sometimes through ritual combat, where captives fought against warriors before being slain. The scale varied, from small ceremonies in villages to grand spectacles involving thousands during empire-wide festivals. Spanish chroniclers, shocked by what they saw, often exaggerated the numbers, claiming tens of thousands were sacrificed at once. Modern scholars debate the accuracy of such accounts, but there is no doubt that human sacrifice was central to Aztec religion. For the Aztecs, it was an act of cosmic responsibility, horrifying to outsiders but sacred to those who believed the universe itself depended on it. This practice has often overshadowed the Aztecs' cultural achievements, reducing them to a caricature of bloodthirsty savages. Yet to understand sacrifice is to understand the Aztec worldview, a cosmos perpetually at risk of collapse, gods who demanded repayment for their own divine self-sacrifice, and a people willing to offer their own lives to keep the sun rising. In this light, human sacrifice was not cruelty, it was survival, painted in blood. The Aztec calendar was a living heartbeat of rituals and festivals, each tied to cycles of agriculture, astronomy, and divine duty. The year was divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus a short 5-day period considered unlucky. Each month honored specific gods with ceremonies that combined music, dance, offerings, and, often, sacrifice. These festivals were not gloomy occasions, but vibrant spectacles, filled with costumes, feasting, and community celebration. They were moments when the entire society, from emperor to slave, came together to reaffirm their place in the cosmic order. The architecture of religion dominated Tenochtitlan. Rising from the city's heart was the Templo Mayor, a massive pyramid with twin shrines dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. To the Aztecs, this was not just a building, but the symbolic center of the universe. Every stone, every staircase carried spiritual meaning, representing the mountains where gods had once sacrificed themselves to create the sun. Surrounding the Templo Mayor were smaller temples, ball courts, and ceremonial platforms, forming a sacred precinct where heaven and earth met. Temples were more than places of worship. They were cosmic machines. Their construction aligned with celestial events, allowing priests to track solstices, equinoxes, and eclipses. Astronomy was intertwined with religion, for the Aztecs believed the heavens revealed the will of the gods. Priests used intricate calendars, including the 260-day ritual calendar, Tanalpwali, to determine auspicious days for war, planting, and sacrifice. Time itself was sacred, a cycle that repeated endlessly, each moment echoing with divine significance. Underlying all these rituals was the belief in cosmic cycles of creation and destruction. The Aztecs believed the world had already ended 4 times, each destruction caused by cosmic imbalance. They lived in the era of the 5th sun, sustained only through human devotion. Every festival, every sacrifice, was a way of feeding the sun, ensuring that dawn would come again. Without these rituals, they feared the universe would collapse into darkness forever. To modernize, such beliefs may seem alien, even frightening. Yet they reveal a profound truth. The Aztecs saw themselves as participants in the drama of creation. Their temples were mountains of the gods, their festivals reenactments of cosmic myths, their sacrifices payments for the sun's fire. In their eyes, daily life and divine eternity were inseparable. By living, farming, warring, and worshiping, they believed they were literally holding the universe together. The rise of the Aztec Empire did not happen overnight. For decades, the Mexica were considered outsiders in the Valley of Mexico, a warrior people who survived by serving stronger neighbors. But everything changed in the early 15th century when the Mexica forged an alliance that would transform them from mercenaries into masters. This was the creation of the Triple Alliance, a political and military pact between Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. The alliance began as a response to tyranny. For years, the Tepanec city of Azcapotzalco dominated the valley, extracting tribute and humiliating weaker states. When the ruler of Tenochtitlan, Itzcoatl, rose to power in 1427, he sought to break free from Tepanec control. With the support of Nezahualcóyotl, the brilliant ruler of Texcoco, and the smaller but strategically important city of Tlacopan, he defeated the Tepanecs in a decisive war. The victory marked a turning point. Azcapotzalco fell, and the balance of power shifted forever. The Triple Alliance divided responsibilities and rewards among its members. Texcoco contributed intellectual and cultural prestige. Tlacopan provided strategic support, and Tenochtitlan supplied relentless military strength. But over time, it was clear that the Mexica capital would dominate. Tenochtitlan took the largest share of tribute, commanded the greatest armies, and positioned itself as the true heart of the alliance. What began as equality soon became empire. Through this alliance, the Aztecs expanded rapidly. Neighboring city-states fell one by one, forced to pay tribute in food, cotton, cacao, feathers, and human captives for sacrifice. Tribute lists grew immense, filling warehouses in Tenochtitlan with riches from across Mesoamerica. The Triple Alliance was more than military conquest. It was economic domination. Entire regions were reorganized to serve the needs of the empire. The foundation of the Aztec Empire was therefore not just the sword but the pact. By uniting with Texcoco and Tlacopan, the Mexica transformed their position from marginalized warriors into rulers of central Mexico. This alliance became the blueprint of imperial power, allowing Tenochtitlan to rise into one of the greatest cities the Americas had ever seen. The Aztec Empire was a machine built for conquest. At its core was the warrior ethos. Every man was trained from youth to serve in battle, and every campaign brought honor, captives, and tribute. Expansion was not simply about land. It was about resources, prestige, and the constant need for sacrifices to feed the gods. Warfare was therefore both political and religious, a fusion of empire and cosmos. Campaigns were carefully organized. Before war, ambassadors were sent to enemy rulers with offers of submission. Pay tribute, accept Aztec overlordship, and provide captives for ritual. If the city refused, war followed swiftly. The Aztec army was a disciplined force, made up of commoners seeking honor and nobles maintaining status. Warriors advanced in rank by capturing enemies alive rather than killing them. Proof that Aztec war was as much about feeding the sacrificial altars as about defeating armies. The tribute system was the lifeblood of the empire. Conquered cities were not always destroyed. Instead, they were integrated into a network of obligations. Tribute could include maize, beans, salt, jade, cotton, cacao, and exotic feathers, all delivered on schedule to Tenochtitlan. In some provinces, entire communities were tasked with producing luxury items for the nobility. Tribute collectors, backed by military force, ensured compliance. For many regions, Aztec domination meant endless labor to sustain the splendor of the capital. Yet conquest also had a psychological impact. Defeated rulers often had to witness their people sacrificed in grand ceremonies. A demonstration of Aztec supremacy meant to discourage rebellion. Even so, resistance simmered. Some conquered peoples, such as the Tlaxcalans, refused to submit fully, waging constant war against the Mexica. Ironically, these enemies became crucial allies of the Spaniards when Cortés arrived, turning resentment into revenge. At its height, the Aztec Empire extended across much of central and southern Mexico, dominating millions of people. The wealth of tribute transformed Tenochtitlan into a glittering metropolis, but it also created deep resentment. The empire was powerful but fragile, bound together by fear and obligation more than loyalty. This tension would later prove fatal when the Spaniards exploited divisions to shatter Aztec rule. Empire requires more than soldiers. It requires strategy, ideology, and symbols of power. The Aztecs ruled through a delicate combination of fear and respect. Fear came from their military might and the terror of sacrifice, while respect came from their cultural achievements and political order. Together, these elements allowed a relatively small ruling elite to dominate millions across Mesoamerica. Fear was maintained through ritualized violence. Public ceremonies of sacrifice reminded both subjects and enemies of the Aztecs' divine mission and their ruthless power. Conquered peoples knew that disobedience could bring swift punishment, destruction of crops, or the capture of their citizens for sacrifice. The psychological weight of these rituals was immense, ensuring compliance without constant warfare. But respect also mattered. The Aztecs integrated conquered elites into their system, granting them positions, marriages, and prestige in exchange for loyalty. Local rulers often retained power as long as they acknowledged Mexica's supremacy and delivered tribute. This balance allowed the empire to expand rapidly without requiring direct governance of every province. Moreover, the Aztecs spread their cultural influence. Language, religious festivals, and markets became shared institutions across the empire. The grandeur of Tenochtitlan itself was a tool of rule. Visiting rulers were awed by its vast temples, bustling markets, and engineered marvels. The city stood as a living symbol of divine favor, a place where the gods themselves seemed to dwell. By showcasing their wealth and sophistication, the Mexica reinforced the idea that resistance was not only futile but impious. Yet ruling through fear and respect was a dangerous balance. The empire's foundation rested on constant conquest, tribute, and sacrifice. Without expansion, the system faltered, for the gods required captives and the nobility demanded wealth. This dependence created cracks in the imperial structure, cracks that would widen when the Spaniards arrived, bringing weapons, disease, and alliances that shattered the fragile balance. In the short term, however, the Aztecs ruled with brilliance. They turned fear into power, respect into loyalty, and conquest into empire. It was a system both majestic and brittle, destined for greatness and for tragedy. When Spanish conquistadors first laid eyes on Tenochtitlan in 1519, they were stunned. Rising from the waters of Lake Texcoco, the city appeared like a vision. A floating metropolis connected to the mainland by massive causeways and bustling with life. At its peak, Tenochtitlan housed perhaps 200,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world, rivaling the great capitals of Europe and Asia. Its architecture and engineering achievements stood as proof that the Mexica had transformed their swampy island into the jewel of Mesoamerica. The city was carefully planned with a grid system of streets and canals. Canoes glided through waterways that doubled as transportation routes, making Tenochtitlan a kind of Venice of the New World. 3 great causeways connected the island to the mainland, each fitted with removable bridges that could be lifted in times of attack, turning the city into a fortress. Aqueducts brought fresh water from nearby springs, a marvel of hydraulic engineering that ensured the population had clean water for drinking and bathing. At the heart of the city stood the sacred precinct, dominated by the towering Templo Mayor. This double pyramid rose nearly 60 meters into the sky, its twin shrines dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun and war, and Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. Surrounding it were dozens of smaller temples, schools, and ball courts, forming the religious and political center of the empire. To the Spaniards, the sight was awe-inspiring, even terrifying, a city that blended beauty with the shadow of sacrifice. Nobles lived in grand palaces with courtyards, gardens, and fountains. The palace of Moctezuma II alone was said to contain hundreds of rooms, aviaries filled with exotic birds, and even a zoo where jaguars, eagles, and serpents were kept for ritual and spectacle. Commoners, though living in simpler adobe houses, shared in the city's prosperity. Their neighborhoods were organized around local temples, schools, and markets, ensuring order in the urban sprawl. What amazed outsiders most was how the Aztecs turned the natural environment into their ally. Swamps were transformed into solid ground with dikes and chinampas. Canals became avenues of commerce, and the lake itself acted as both protection and resource. Tenochtitlan was not only a city, but a masterpiece of human adaptation, a living symbol of the Aztecs' ingenuity and vision. The true secret of Tenochtitlan's success lay not only in its temples or palaces, but in its revolutionary system of agriculture. Surrounded by water and marshland, the Aztecs invented a technique that turned disadvantage into abundance. The chinampas, often called floating gardens. These were not literal rafts, but carefully constructed plots of fertile land built in shallow waters, anchored with stakes and woven reeds, then layered with mud and vegetation until they formed stable fields. Chinampas were extraordinary in their productivity. Each plot could yield up to 7 harvests per year, far surpassing traditional farming methods. Farmers grew maize, beans, squash, chili peppers, amaranth, and flowers, ensuring a steady food supply for the enormous population of the capital. Irrigation came naturally from the surrounding waters, and the rich lakebed soil kept the chinampas fertile year after year. Even today, remnants of this system in Xochimilco demonstrate its enduring brilliance. The Chinampas were also environmentally sustainable. By recycling organic waste into the soil and maintaining a symbiotic relationship with the lake's ecosystem, the Aztecs created a self-renewing agricultural system. Canals between the Chinampas allowed for canoe transport, turning farms into interconnected highways of commerce. Families managed plots passed down through generations, creating both stability and prosperity. The abundance produced by Chinampas sustained not only the common people, but also the empire's demands for tribute and sacrifice. Food surpluses fed armies on campaign, supported the construction of temples, and allowed specialized artisans, priests, and nobles to flourish. In essence, the Chinampas fueled the empire's golden age, transforming Tenochtitlan into a city where no one went hungry and where markets overflowed with produce. Spanish chroniclers marveled at the sight of these gardens, describing them as floating islands filled with flowers and crops. To them, it seemed like a paradise on water, a vision of human ingenuity at its peak. But for the Aztecs, Chinampas were more than technology. They were sacred gifts from the gods, a way of honoring the earth while sustaining the people. In the harmony of water and land, they saw a reflection of cosmic balance, proof that divine favor had blessed their empire. While the Aztecs are often remembered for war and sacrifice, their golden age was also a period of extraordinary cultural achievement. Tenochtitlan was a city of poets, painters, sculptors, and philosophers. In their worldview, art was not a luxury, but a sacred duty, a way of expressing the divine order and connecting human experience to cosmic truth. Poetry held a particularly honored place. Aztec rulers, such as Nezahualcóyotl of Texcoco, were celebrated not only as warriors and statesmen, but also as great poets. Their verses explored themes of mortality, the fleeting nature of life, and the eternal cycle of creation and destruction. "We only borrow this earth," one poem declared, capturing the Aztec belief that human existence was temporary, but beauty eternal. These poems were sung with drums and flutes, performed at festivals, and memorized by students in schools, ensuring that wisdom was carried from one generation to the next. Art and sculpture adorned the empire. Temples and palaces were decorated with intricate carvings of gods, serpents, and sacred animals. Featherwork, created from the iridescent plumes of tropical birds, was among the most prized forms of art, used to craft headdresses, shields, and ceremonial garments that shimmered with divine brilliance. Codices, painted manuscripts on deerskin or bark paper, recorded history, rituals, and astronomy through vibrant imagery, though many were later burned by the Spaniards in their effort to erase native culture. Knowledge was also advanced. Aztec priests and scholars maintained precise calendars, tracked planetary movements, and developed medical practices using herbs and surgery. Education ensured that knowledge spread throughout society, from astronomy in the Kalmukak to agricultural wisdom among farmers. The city's libraries and oral traditions preserved centuries of learning, blending myth with empirical observation. To the Aztecs, art and knowledge were inseparable from religion. Beauty was truth, and truth was divine. Every feather mosaic, every carved stone, every song was part of their mission to sustain the universe. This cultural richness left a legacy that endures in modern Mexico, where Aztec symbols, poetry, and artistry remain sources of pride. In their golden age, the Aztecs proved they were not only conquerors of land, but also explorers of the human spirit. The man who would bring about the downfall of the Aztec Empire was Hernán Cortés, a Spanish conquistador whose ambition and audacity changed the course of history. Born in 1485 in Medellin, a small town in Spain's Extremadura region, Cortés came of age in a world transformed by exploration. Only a few years earlier, Christopher Columbus had sailed to the Caribbean, opening a gateway to the Americas. Cortés, restless and ambitious, yearned for glory and fortune in this new world. In his youth, Cortés studied briefly at the University of Salamanca, but his restless spirit did not suit academic life. Instead, he sought adventure in the colonies, sailing to Hispaniola and later Cuba. There he gained experience as a soldier, administrator, and politician. But what set Cortés apart was his hunger for personal power. He was not satisfied with serving under others. He wanted command, conquest, and riches that would secure his name in history. In 1519, when rumors spread of a wealthy empire inland on the mainland of Mexico, Cortés seized his chance. Against the orders of the governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez, he assembled a force of roughly 600 men, 16 horses, a few small cannons, and ships. It was a small army by European standards, but Cortés had confidence in strategy, cunning, and the element of surprise. His gamble was extraordinary: to conquer an empire of millions with only a few hundred Spaniards. Cortés's ambitions were not purely personal. Like many conquistadors, he was driven by the ideology of Spain's expanding empire, the search for gold, the spread of Christianity, and the extension of royal authority. Yet beneath these motives lay his own relentless determination to rise above obscurity. He believed destiny had chosen him to achieve greatness, no matter the cost. This ambition, combined with a ruthless pragmatism, made Cortés both charismatic and dangerous. He could inspire loyalty among his men, negotiate alliances with native peoples, and at the same time betray, manipulate, and destroy anyone who stood in his way. When he set sail for the coast of Mexico, he carried with him not only steel and gunpowder, but also the cunning of man who believed the world belonged to those bold enough to seize it. When Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico in 1519, he entered a world utterly different from Europe, yet already alive with whispers of strangers from the sea. The coastal Totonac peoples, weary of Aztec tribute demands, were among the first to greet him. Seeing in the Spaniards potential allies against their overlords, they offered food, supplies, and information. Cortés quickly realized that native discontent could be his greatest weapon. At the same time, the Spaniards brought terror and fascination. Horses, never seen before in the Americas, seemed like mythical beasts. Steel swords, crossbows, and gunpowder weapons shattered traditional warfare, even though the Spaniards' numbers were small. Most crucial of all was the role of Malintzin, also known as La Malinche, a native woman given to Cortés as a slave. Fluent in Nahuatl, Maya, and later Spanish, she became his interpreter, advisor, and confidant. Through her, Cortés could communicate with native rulers, forge alliances, and exploit divisions. Without her, his campaign might have failed. The first formal encounters with Aztec envoys revealed both caution and curiosity. Emperor Moctezuma II, hearing reports of pale-skinned strangers with thunderous weapons, was troubled by omens and prophecies. Some accounts suggest he feared Cortés might be linked to the returning god Quetzalcoatl, whose myth foretold a fair-skinned deity arriving from the east. Whether or not this belief was truly widespread, Moctezuma hesitated to confront the newcomers directly, sending lavish gifts of gold and featherwork in hopes of appeasement. Ironically, these gifts only inflamed Spanish greed. Cortés pressed inland, forging alliances with peoples hostile to the Aztecs, most notably the Tlaxcalans. After fierce battles, they became his most loyal native allies, providing thousands of warriors who would later fight against Tenochtitlan itself. Cortés skillfully turned local resentment into a coalition, portraying himself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator from Aztec oppression. By the time the Spaniards reached the shores of Lake Texcoco, the stage was set for a clash unlike any the world had seen. The Spaniards, outnumbered thousands to one, carried with them disease, steel, and ruthless ambition. The Aztecs, masters of Mesoamerica, were powerful but divided, their empire built on tribute and fear. The first encounters had been cautious, even diplomatic, but soon they would explode into confrontation, forever altering the fate of both worlds. The early interactions between Cortés and the Aztecs were marked by a delicate dance of diplomacy, riddled with cultural misunderstandings that would have fatal consequences. Moctezuma II, ruler of the Aztecs, was a cautious and deeply religious man. He interpreted omens, consulted priests, and sought signs from the gods before making decisions. When news of the Spaniards reached him, strange men with white skin, iron weapons, and beasts that could not be explained, he hesitated. Should he see them as allies, enemies, or divine messengers? Moctezuma chose diplomatie. He sent emissaries bearing gifts of gold, jade, and luxurious feather cloaks. To him, these offerings were signs of respect, tokens of hospitality meant to establish controlled relations. But to Cortés and his men, they were proof that vast wealth lay ahead, convincing them that this empire was ripe for plunder. What Moctezuma intended as cautious appeasement became, in Spanish eyes, an invitation. When Cortés finally entered Tenochtitlan in November 1519, the moment was astonishing. The Spaniards crossed the causeways into a city larger and more dazzling than anything they had imagined. They were greeted by Moctezuma himself, carried in royal splendor and surrounded by nobles. The emperor welcomed them with words of courtesy, perhaps even submission, offering them residence in the palace. Yet beneath the ceremonies, tension simmered. The Spaniards could not comprehend the ritualistic nature of Aztec politics, where symbolic gestures of gift-giving and hosting were part of a careful balance of power. Instead, they read everything through the lens of European conquest, wealth to seize, rulers to control, gods to suppress. Meanwhile, the Aztecs struggled to understand these strangers who violated sacred spaces, mocked their gods, and demanded absolute allegiance. Thus began a fragile coexistence. Cortés and his men lived as uneasy guests in the heart of the empire, studying the city, its wealth, and its defenses. Moctezuma, torn between fear and caution, tried to contain them with hospitality. But misunderstanding grew into mistrust, and mistrust into betrayal. Diplomacy delayed the inevitable, but it could not prevent the clash of civilizations. The encounter of Spaniard and Aztec was not merely a meeting of two peoples. It was a collision of two worlds, each unable to fully grasp the other, and it set the stage for tragedy. The meeting between Moctezuma II and Hernán Cortés remains one of history's most dramatic encounters, symbolizing the moment when two civilizations, each with its own worldview, traditions, and ambitions, stood face to face. Moctezuma, the ninth ruler of the Aztec Empire, had ascended to the throne in 1502, presiding over a realm that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific. His reign marked both the height of Aztec power and the beginning of its decline. Moctezuma was a deeply religious man, cautious and contemplative. His court was filled with priests, diviners, and astronomers who interpreted every sign in the heavens as a message from the gods. In the years before the Spaniards' arrival, the empire had been unsettled by omens. Comets streaking across the sky, unexplained fires in temples, and voices heard in the night predicting disaster. Against this backdrop, the sudden appearance of foreigners from across the sea, pale, bearded, riding beasts never seen before, was deeply unsettling. When Cortés entered Tenochtitlan in November 1519, Moctezuma greeted him with ceremony. Chroniclers describe the emperor descending from his litter, adorned in gold and jade, surrounded by nobles in splendid attire. Cortés, clad in steel and bearing the banner of the cross, dismounted and embraced him. The two men exchanged gifts. Moctezuma offered turquoise, gold, and feathered headdresses, while Cortés presented European trinkets. But beneath the gestures, mistrust simmered. Moctezuma's motives are still debated. Some suggest he genuinely believed Cortés might be linked to the returning god Quetzalcoatl. Others argue he was simply cautious, seeking to buy time until he could better assess the threat. Cortés, however, interpreted Moctezuma's deference as weakness. Within weeks, the Spaniards seized the emperor, holding him under house arrest within his own palace. It was a shocking move. The most powerful ruler in Mesoamerica reduced to a prisoner, forced to rule as a puppet under Spanish control. This moment revealed the fundamental clash of civilizations. The Aztecs saw rulership as a sacred duty, tied to cosmic balance and divine legitimacy. The Spaniards, by contrast, saw power as something to be seized and controlled, regardless of tradition. The meeting of Moctezuma and Cortés was not merely diplomatic. It was the collision of two incompatible worldviews, a fragile balance that could not hold. At the heart of the clash between Spaniard and Aztec was not just politics or power, but religion. Each side viewed the other through the lens of its own sacred truth, unable to reconcile two radically different visions of the divine. For the Aztecs, their world revolved around a pantheon of gods who demanded ritual, sacrifice, and devotion to keep the cosmos in balance. For the Spaniards, shaped by the Catholic faith and the Reconquista, there was only one God, one truth, and one mission: to spread Christianity and destroy idolatry. To the Spaniards, the great temples of Tenochtitlan were monuments of blasphemy. They saw the rituals of blood sacrifice as barbaric, the worship of idols as demonic. Cortés and his chaplains insisted on tearing down images of Aztec gods and replacing them with crosses and statues of the Virgin Mary. To the Aztecs, this was sacrilege, an assault not only on their gods, but on the very order of the universe. Every act of desecration threatened to unravel the fragile balance that sustained the fifth sun. The Spaniards believed they were engaged in holy war, continuing the crusading spirit that had driven them to expel Muslims and Jews from Spain. The Aztecs believed they were guardians of cosmic order, chosen by the gods to maintain life through sacrifice. When these two worldviews met, there could be no compromise. Each saw the other not as an equal civilization, but as heresy. Religion shaped the strategies of both sides. The Spaniards used Christianity as justification for conquest, claiming to save souls even as they enslaved bodies. They baptized allies, destroyed idols, and preached conversion, often backed by the threat of violence. The Aztecs, meanwhile, interpreted Spanish aggression through their own myths. Some wondered if the invaders were divine messengers. Others saw them as demons who disrupted sacred harmony. This religious clash fueled mistrust and violence. To the Spaniards, destroying Aztec temples was a triumph of faith. To the Aztecs, it was an unbearable violation. What began as diplomacy quickly hardened into confrontation, as neither side could accept the other's gods. The stage was set for war, not merely between armies, but between heavens, each side fighting for the soul of the world. The conquest of Mexico was not simply Spaniards against Aztecs. It was a complex web of alliances, betrayals, and shifting loyalties that revealed the fractures within Mesoamerica. Cortés, cunning and pragmatic, understood that his small force could never defeat the Aztec Empire alone. His greatest weapon was not steel or gunpowder, but diplomacy, exploiting the resentment of subject peoples who chafed under Aztec tribute and sacrifice. Foremost among these allies were the Tlaxcalans, fierce warriors who had resisted Aztec domination for decades. After initial battles with the Spaniards, they chose alliance over annihilation. Thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors joined Cortés, swelling his ranks and providing invaluable knowledge of terrain, tactics, and Aztec weaknesses. For them, the Spaniards were a chance to break free from Aztec oppression. Other groups, such as the Totonacs and Huitzincas, also sided with Cortés, eager to overthrow their overlords. Each alliance gave the Spaniards more manpower, supplies, and legitimacy. Cortés skillfully presented himself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, even as he planned to replace Aztec rule with Spanish domination. Betrayals also shaped the conquest. Some Aztec nobles, resentful of Moctezuma's caution or eager for power, secretly aided the Spaniards. Others provided intelligence or withheld support at critical moments. Even within Tenochtitlan, divisions weakened the empire's response. Yet these alliances came at a cost. Native allies soon discovered that the Spaniards sought not freedom, but empire. The promises of liberation gave way to forced conversions, exploitation, and disease. But by the time this became clear, the fate of the Aztecs was sealed. The conquest was, therefore, not a simple clash of Spaniards and Aztecs. It was a civil war of Mesoamerica, with Spaniards as the catalyst. Betrayals and alliances revealed the fragility of the empire, turning its enemies into executioners and its allies into instruments of conquest. In this web of shifting loyalties, the Aztec world unraveled, preparing the way for the tragic fall of Tenochtitlan. The fragile balance between Spaniards and Aztecs shattered in 1520 with an event that became legendary, La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. For months, Cortés and his men had lived uneasily in Tenochtitlan, effectively holding Emperor Moctezuma under house arrest while trying to consolidate control. Tensions boiled as Spaniards desecrated temples, looted treasures, and interfered with sacred rituals. The breaking point came during the Festival of Toxcatl, when Spanish soldiers massacred unarmed Aztec nobles and priests in the sacred precinct, fearing an uprising. Instead of intimidating the Aztecs, the massacre ignited fury. The city erupted in rebellion. Warriors surrounded the Spaniards and their allies, cutting off supplies and launching relentless attacks. In the chaos, Moctezuma was killed, whether by Spanish blades or by stones from his own people remains uncertain. His death symbolized the collapse of diplomacy. Cortés and his men, trapped in the heart of the empire, faced annihilation. On the night of June 30th, 1520, the Spaniards attempted a desperate escape across the causeways under cover of darkness. Laden with stolen gold, they tried to slip away silently. But the Aztecs were ready. Alarms rang out, and thousands of warriors attacked from canoes and along the causeways. Arrows, spears, and obsidian blades rained upon the retreating Spaniards. Many drowned when bridges collapsed, dragged down by the weight of plunder. Others were captured alive, later sacrificed atop the Templo Mayor. The Spaniards called it the Night of Sorrows, for hundreds of their comrades perished, along with countless native allies. Cortés himself wept beneath a tree, mourning the disaster. Yet the retreat was not total defeat. Though battered and bloodied, the survivors escaped to Tlaxcala, where they regrouped. For the Aztecs, the victory was glorious, a sign that their gods still protected them. But the triumph was fleeting, for disease, betrayal, and Spanish determination would soon turn the tide. La Noche Triste was a turning point. It revealed the resilience of the Aztecs, the vulnerability of the Spaniards, and the tragic spiral of war that could no longer be stopped. It was the moment when conquest turned from uneasy coexistence to total war, setting the stage for the final siege of Tenochtitlan. The following year, 1521, brought the climactic struggle, the siege of Tenochtitlan. By this time, smallpox, carried unknowingly by the Spaniards, had swept through the city, killing thousands, including the Emperor Cuitlahuac, Moctezuma's successor. Disease weakened the Aztecs at the very moment they needed strength most. Their new leader, Cuauhtémoc, young and determined, rallied his people to resist. He embodied the spirit of defiance, refusing surrender even as the empire crumbled around him. Cortés returned with reinforcements, including more Spaniards, artillery, and, most decisively, tens of thousands of native allies, such as the Tlaxcalans. Together, they launched a systematic campaign to destroy the capital. Brigantines, small warships built on Lake Texcoco, gave the Spaniards naval superiority, cutting off supplies and isolating Tenochtitlan from surrounding towns. The siege was brutal. Day after day, the Spaniards and their allies advanced along the causeways, dismantling defenses, burning temples, and tearing down aqueducts. Hunger and thirst ravaged the city as famine took hold. Despite this, the Aztecs fought with unmatched ferocity. Warriors launched ambushes from canals, rebuilt barricades at night, and defended every street, house, and temple with determination. Civilians, too, bore the suffering, enduring starvation and disease while refusing to abandon their city. Spanish accounts describe the devastation. Once proud temples reduced to rubble, canals filled with corpses, and the streets echoing with cries of both warriors and women. Yet amid the horror, there was also dignity. Cuauhtémoc led from the front, refusing to flee, urging his people to fight to the last. For him, surrender meant dishonor worse than death. After 93 days of relentless assault, Tenochtitlan finally fell on August 13th, 1521. The once great city, the jewel of Mesoamerica, lay in ruins. The canals ran red with blood, and the air reeked of death. The fall of Tenochtitlan was not just the collapse of a city, but the end of an empire, the destruction of a civilization that had dominated central Mexico for centuries. The siege was one of history's most dramatic battles, a clash of steel and obsidian, faith and faith, destiny and disaster. It marked the beginning of a new world built on the ruins of the old. The fall of Tenochtitlan was more than a military defeat. It was the collapse of an entire worldview. The Aztecs had seen themselves as guardians of the fifth sun, chosen to sustain the universe through ritual, sacrifice, and devotion. With the city's destruction, it seemed as though the cosmos itself had betrayed them. The once great empire was reduced to ashes, its temples torn down, its rulers executed or enslaved, its people subjected to foreign gods and foreign rule. For the survivors, the collapse was total. Thousands perished in the siege. Many more died from disease and famine. Entire families were wiped out, noble lineages broken, and cultural traditions shattered. Cuauhtémoc, captured by the Spaniards while trying to escape, was tortured in vain for hidden treasure before being executed. His death symbolized the extinguishing of Aztec sovereignty, though his defiance made him a symbol of resistance in later centuries. The Spaniards immediately set about transforming Tenochtitlan into Mexico City, capital of New Spain. Churches rose where temples once stood, crosses replaced idols, and Spanish law and language supplanted native traditions. Survivors were forced into encomiendas, systems of forced labor that extracted wealth for Spanish colonists. The cycle of tribute continued, only now flowing across the sea to Spain. Yet amid the devastation, fragments of Aztec culture endured. Language, traditions, and rituals survived in hidden forms, passed down through generations. The Nahua people adapted, blending Catholicism with native beliefs, preserving stories and knowledge, even under oppression. But the grandeur of the empire was gone, replaced by colonial rule. The collapse of the Aztec world was a tragedy not only for the Mexica, but for all of Mesoamerica. It was the violent meeting of civilizations, the shattering of an indigenous order, and the birth of a colonial one. For the Spaniards, it was victory. For the Aztecs, apocalypse. Yet in memory and legend, the fall of Tenochtitlan became more than defeat. It became a story of resilience, of a people whose identity could not be fully erased, even in the face of conquest. With the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521, the world of the Aztecs was violently transformed. What had been one of the most powerful indigenous empires in the Americas became the heart of a new colony, New Spain. The Spanish crown wasted no time in asserting its authority. Cortés claimed the land for King Charles V, dismantled Aztec institutions, and imposed European systems of governance, law, and religion. The conquest had not only destroyed an empire, it had set the stage for 3 centuries of colonial domination. Christianization became the cornerstone of this new order. Spanish friars, Franciscans, Dominicans, and Augustinians arrived with zeal to convert the indigenous population. To them, the temples of the Aztecs were symbols of idolatry, and so they were torn down, replaced by churches and monasteries. The Templo Mayor, once the sacred heart of the Mexico world, was demolished, its stones repurposed for cathedrals that proclaimed the triumph of Christianity. For the Spaniards, this was not only conquest of land, but conquest of the soul. Conversion was carried out through a mixture of persuasion, coercion, and force. Indigenous people were baptized en masse, often without full understanding of the new faith. Priests taught catechism in Nahuatl, blending Christian stories with local traditions to make the message more familiar. Festivals once dedicated to Aztec gods were reinterpreted as Christian celebrations. Yet beneath the surface, many communities retained elements of their old religion, merging it with Catholic practice in a form of spiritual resistance. Colonization also transformed daily life. The encomienda system placed native communities under Spanish encomenderos, who extracted labor and tribute in exchange for supposed protection and Christian instruction. In reality, it often meant exploitation, harsh labor, and abuse. Traditional leaders were replaced or co-opted into colonial administration, creating a hierarchy that mirrored Spanish society. Spanish became the language of law and government, though Nahuatl persisted among the people. The transformation was staggering. In less than a generation, the Aztec Empire had vanished, replaced by a colonial society that erased temples, reshaped rituals, and demanded loyalty to a distant monarch in Spain. Yet despite the brutality of conquest and Christianization, indigenous traditions did not vanish completely. They adapted, survived, and endured, hidden within the very structures imposed upon them. One of the most enduring legacies of the Spanish conquest was the narrative the conquerors crafted about the Aztecs. Spanish chroniclers, seeking to justify their actions, emphasized the brutality of Aztec human sacrifice, portraying the Mexica as savages who needed salvation through Christianity. While sacrifice had indeed been central to Aztec religion, the scale and nature of it were often exaggerated to paint the conquest as a holy mission rather than an act of imperial greed. According to Spanish accounts, tens of thousands of captives were sacrificed in single ceremonies, their hearts torn out in rivers of blood. These descriptions, written by men like Bernal Diaz del Castillo and friars eager to highlight the supposed barbarism of the natives, created a lasting image of the Aztecs as bloodthirsty and cruel. This narrative not only justified the conquest to audiences back in Europe, but also undermined the cultural achievements of the Mexica, reducing them to caricatures defined by violence. Modern scholarship paints a more nuanced picture. Archaeological evidence confirms that human sacrifice was real and significant, but the numbers were likely far smaller than Spanish chroniclers claimed. Sacrifice was tied to religious belief, cosmic duty, and political spectacle, not senseless slaughter. The victims were often captured warriors, whose deaths were seen as honorable offerings to the gods. To the Aztecs, these rituals were sacred acts that sustained the sun and ensured survival. The Spanish narrative, however, proved powerful. It shaped centuries of perception, portraying the Aztecs as a people doomed by their own savagery. This black legend overshadowed their remarkable achievements in engineering, agriculture, governance, and art. It reduced a complex civilization to a single horrifying practice, allowing colonizers to claim moral superiority while masking their own acts of brutality, including massacres, enslavement, and the spread of devastating diseases. Today, historians and descendants of the Nahua people seek to reclaim this narrative. By acknowledging the reality of sacrifice while also emphasizing the cultural, intellectual, and spiritual achievements of the Aztecs, they challenge the one-dimensional image left by colonial accounts. The truth is more complex. A society that blended devotion and violence, beauty and blood, tragedy and brilliance. Despite the collapse of their empire and the crushing weight of colonization, the Aztecs' descendants, the Nahua people, did not vanish. Their culture, language, and tradition survived, often hidden beneath layers of Spanish rule. Through resilience and adaptation, they preserved elements of their identity, ensuring that the spirit of the Aztec world endured long after the fall of Tenochtitlan. Language was one of the strongest continuities. Nahuatl remained widely spoken across central Mexico, used in villages, marketplaces, and even in some colonial administration. Missionaries translated catechisms and scriptures into Nahuatl, inadvertently preserving the language while trying to spread Christianity. Today, millions still speak it, a living connection to the Mexica past. Rituals and beliefs also endured, though often transformed. Many indigenous festivals were repurposed into Christian celebrations, blending old and new traditions. The Day of the Dead, for example, reflects both Catholic and pre-Hispanic roots, celebrating ancestors with altars, offerings, and food. Traditional healers continued to practice herbal medicine, drawing on knowledge passed down through generations. Art and symbolism likewise survived. Indigenous artisans incorporated Aztec motifs into colonial churches, hiding native imagery in Christian architecture. Featherwork, pottery, and weaving retained their traditional patterns, even as they were adapted for new contexts. Oral traditions, stories, songs, and poems preserved memory, keeping alive the myths of gods, heroes, and the fall of the empire. The Nahua people also resisted through adaptation. By merging elements of Catholicism with their own spirituality, they created a hybrid faith that allowed them to honor both new and old gods. This syncretism became a quiet form of survival, ensuring continuity in the face of suppression. Today, the legacy of the Aztecs remains visible not only in language and culture, but also in national identity. Mexico itself takes its name from the Mexica, and the eagle on a cactus, once a sacred prophecy, still adorns the national flag. The survival of Nahua culture is a testament to resilience. Though the empire fell, the people endured, carrying their heritage into the present and reminding the world that conquest could not erase identity. The fall of the Aztec Empire stands as one of history's great tragedies, a story where brilliance and resilience met betrayal and destruction. At its height, the Mexica people had built one of the most dazzling civilizations in the Americas. Tenochtitlan rose like a dream from the waters, sustained by chinampas, defended by causeways, and crowned by temples that reached toward the heavens. Its markets overflowed with goods, its poets sang of life's brevity, and its priests tracked the movements of stars with precision. Yet within just 2 years, this world collapsed beneath the weight of Spanish steel, gunpowder, disease, and deception. The tragedy lies not only in the conquest itself, but in the clash of worldviews. To the Aztecs, the cosmos demanded sacrifice, ritual, and balance. To the Spaniards, only one god reigned supreme, and all other beliefs were heresy. Neither side could understand the other, and so dialogue turned to domination. What might have been a meeting of cultures became a catastrophe of conquest. The human cost was immense. Tens of thousands perished in war, famine, and plague. Entire generations were lost. The survivors were forced into systems of labor and tribute under Spanish rule, stripped of sovereignty and subjected to foreign gods. The great temples were torn down, replaced by churches, as if to erase memory itself. For the Nahua, it was the end of an age, the fifth sun extinguished not by prophecy, but by conquest. Yet, even as we mourn the fall, we must also recognize the resilience that followed. The Aztecs' achievements in engineering, art, poetry, and governance remind us that this was no savage people, as the Spaniards claimed, but a sophisticated civilization. Their story is not just one of blood and sacrifice, but of creativity, innovation, and endurance. The tragedy of conquest is not simply that a civilization was destroyed, but that its complexity was reduced to caricature by those who conquered it. The encounter between the Aztec Empire and the Spanish conquistadors was more than a battle of armies. It was a clash of civilizations. Two worlds collided, each with its own values, faith, and vision of order. The Spaniards came with steel, horses, and crossbows, but also with the certainty of a single truth. The Aztecs, with their obsidian blades and cosmic rituals, lived in a universe where gods demanded constant nourishment. Neither side could truly grasp the other, and that inability to understand led to devastation. This clash offers lessons that resonate even today. First, it shows the dangers of dehumanization. The Spaniards justified their conquest by portraying the Aztecs as savages, ignoring their achievements in art, science, and governance. The Aztecs, in turn, saw the Spaniards as potential gods or demons, struggling to fit them into their cosmic framework. In both cases, misunderstanding replaced empathy. The result was not dialogue, but destruction. Second, the conquest reveals the fragility of empire. The Aztecs appeared invincible, ruling millions through tribute and fear. Yet resentment simmered beneath the surface, and Cortés exploited those divisions to topple the empire with a fraction of its strength. The lesson is timeless. No empire, however powerful, can endure if it rules without loyalty, if its foundation rests on fear rather than trust. Finally, the story warns us of cultural arrogance. The Spaniards believed they carried the only true faith, the only path to civilization. Their victory allowed them to impose that vision, but it came at the cost of erasing a rich cultural world. Today, as global civilizations interact more closely than ever, the fall of the Aztecs reminds us of the importance of humility, respect, and recognition of different ways of being human. The clash of civilizations was a tragedy, but its lessons endure. By reflecting on the mistakes of the past, we may hope to avoid repeating them, ensuring that encounters between cultures bring understanding, not annihilation. Though the Aztec Empire fell in 1521, its spirit has never truly disappeared. The legacy of the Mexica endures in modern Mexico, woven into language, culture, and national identity. Far from being erased, the Aztec world has been remembered, reinterpreted, and celebrated. A reminder that conquest cannot fully extinguish memory. Perhaps the most visible legacy is the Mexican flag itself, which features the eagle perched on a cactus devouring a serpent. The very prophecy that led the Mexica to found Tenochtitlan. This symbol, born of myth, now stands at the heart of national pride, uniting millions under the story of a people who turned hardship into destiny. Mexico's very name comes from the Mexica, proof that their identity still shapes the nation. The Nahuatl language, once the tongue of empire, remains alive, spoken by over 1 million people today. Words from Nahuatl, such as chocolate, tomato, and avocado, have spread worldwide, subtle reminders of the Aztecs' contribution to global culture. Festivals like Dia de los Muertos reflect a fusion of Catholic and indigenous traditions, where offerings to ancestors echo the rituals of the past. Archaeological sites, such as the Templo Mayor in Mexico City, remind visitors that beneath the modern capital lies the heart of Tenochtitlan. Museums preserve codices, sculptures, and featherwork, while poets and scholars revive the voices of Nahua writers whose works survived conquest. In these ways, the Aztec world continues to inspire. Most importantly, the legacy lives in the people. The descendants of the Nahua still farm, craft, and tell stories rooted in ancient tradition. They embody resilience, carrying forward a culture that refused to vanish. For Mexico, the Aztec legacy is not merely history. It is identity shaping art, politics, and pride. Thus, the story of the Aztecs is not only one of rise and fall, but of survival and renewal. Though their empire collapsed, their spirit endures, reminding the world that civilizations may be conquered, but cultures live on. When Hernán Cortés and his men marched into the Valley of Mexico, they carried with them more than steel, gunpowder, and horses. They brought an invisible enemy that would prove deadlier than any weapon: disease. The most devastating of these was smallpox, a viral infection unknown in the Americas before European contact. The Aztecs had no immunity to it, and when it struck, it spread like wildfire through their densely populated cities, killing indiscriminately and destabilizing society at its very core. The first outbreak came in 1520, shortly after Cortés left Tenochtitlan to deal with Spanish rivals on the coast. A member of his expedition, an African slave infected with smallpox, was the unwitting carrier. As the disease entered the capital, it found a fertile environment. Tenochtitlan, with its canals, markets, and crowded neighborhoods, became a perfect breeding ground. Within weeks, the plague overwhelmed the city. Descriptions from the time are harrowing. Victims developed fever, rashes, and painful pustules that covered their bodies. Many were blinded, others suffocated as sores spread to their throats. Those who survived were often scarred for life. But the greatest impact was not just physical, it was societal. Families collapsed as caregivers fell ill. Fields went untended, markets emptied, and entire neighborhoods became silent. Priests could not perform rituals, warriors could not fight, and leaders were struck down in their prime. The epidemic did not distinguish between ruler and commoner. Even Cuitlahuac, Moctezuma's successor, succumbed to smallpox only weeks after taking power. His death created political chaos just as the Aztecs faced renewed Spanish attacks. For a society that believed balance with the gods sustained the universe, the sudden onslaught of disease seemed like cosmic betrayal. To the Spaniards, the plague was interpreted as divine favor, proof that God was clearing the way for their conquest. For the Aztecs, it was an inexplicable disaster, a curse beyond the reach of their rituals. The invisible enemy had arrived, and it would shape the outcome of the conquest as decisively as any battle on the causeways. While the Spaniards did not deliberately unleash smallpox as a weapon, its impact functioned as one. The disease tore through indigenous communities, killing not only warriors but also farmers, artisans, and leaders, crippling the very foundation of Aztec society. In effect, smallpox became the most powerful ally Cortés could have imagined, softening resistance before swords and cannon struck. During the siege of Tenochtitlan in 1521, smallpox ravaged the defenders. Spanish chroniclers observed that the disease killed more Aztecs than warfare. Starving, weakened, and grieving, the people could not fight with the same strength as before. Entire districts were depopulated, leaving once bustling neighborhoods eerily empty. The epidemic spread beyond the city, devastating towns across central Mexico and even reaching as far as Guatemala in the years that followed. The psychological toll was just as devastating. For a society built on rituals of sacrifice and cosmic order, the disease struck without reason or pattern. Unlike war, where bravery and skill could determine survival, smallpox spared no one. Priests, nobles, warriors, and children all fell alike. The gods seemed silent, their rituals powerless against this new terror. In the minds of many, this eroded confidence in traditional religion, opening space for the Spaniards' Christian message. Cortés understood the advantage. With the Aztecs weakened, he pressed harder, using his native allies to exploit the chaos. Cities that might have resisted were too decimated to fight. The Spaniards advanced with confidence, knowing disease had already broken the back of resistance. Smallpox, though unplanned, acted as the ultimate force multiplier, turning a small band of conquistadors into conquerors of empires. Historians later described smallpox as the greatest weapon of the conquest. Unlike swords or muskets, it required no skill to wield and no mercy to spare. It swept through the land like fire through dry grass, clearing the way for colonization. In the tragic irony of history, the Aztecs' downfall was determined not only by steel and betrayal, but by microbes they had never known. Smallpox was only the beginning. In the decades after the conquest, waves of epidemics followed, reshaping the very demographic and cultural landscape of Mesoamerica. Typhus, measles, influenza, and plague struck repeatedly, each leaving devastation in its wake. Between 1519 and 1600, the indigenous population of central Mexico is estimated to have collapsed from perhaps 20 million to fewer than 2 million. This was not just conquest, it was demographic catastrophe on a scale rarely seen in human history. The collapse of population had far-reaching consequences. Entire villages disappeared, their lands abandoned. Labor shortages transformed the economy, as Spaniards relied on surviving indigenous communities through the encomienda system or imported African slaves to fill the gaps. Agricultural systems faltered, tribute collection weakened, and cultural continuity was disrupted as elders, priests, and knowledge keepers died in vast numbers. The loss of oral tradition meant that entire aspects of Aztec history and belief vanished forever. Psychologically, epidemics reinforced the narrative of Spanish superiority. Many indigenous survivors interpreted the diseases as divine punishment, signs that their gods had abandoned them and that the Spaniards' god was more powerful. This perception accelerated conversion to Christianity, sometimes willingly, sometimes under coercion. For the Spaniards, the epidemics were both a justification and a tool, proof that conquest was ordained by heaven. Yet amid this devastation, resilience remained. Survivors adapted, merging traditions with new realities. Nahuatl continued to be spoken, rituals persisted in hybrid forms, and communities reorganized themselves under colonial rule. The epidemics changed the face of Mexico forever, but they did not erase the people entirely. In the broader history of the Americas, the story of smallpox in the Aztec world symbolizes a grim pattern. The meeting of old world and new was as much biological as cultural. Disease became the silent conqueror, reshaping continents. For the Aztecs, it was an invisible apocalypse, an enemy against which no obsidian blade or warrior's courage could prevail. In the Aztec world, women played roles that were vital to the survival and stability of society. Though the empire is often remembered for its warriors, priests, and emperors, it was the daily lives of women that kept communities functioning. From birth, girls were taught that their destiny lay not on the battlefield, but within the household, the marketplace, and the weaving room. Yet this did not mean their lives were insignificant. On the contrary, women were regarded as the anchors of Aztec civilization. Marriage was considered the natural duty of every woman. Families arranged unions with the help of matchmakers, ensuring that alliances strengthened kinship ties and community networks. Once married, a woman's responsibilities were immense. She managed the household, prepared food, raised children, and wove textiles. Corn was the heart of the Aztec diet, and women spent countless hours grinding maize into masa to make tortillas and tamales, ensuring their families were fed. Weaving, too, was more than a chore. It was an art form, producing clothes, blankets, and ritual garments essential to society. Women also participated actively in the economy. Many worked as traders in local markets, selling food, pottery, cloth, and flowers. The great marketplace of Tlatelolco bustled with women vendors whose goods sustained the empire's economy. Female healers and midwives also held respected positions, drawing on herbal knowledge to treat illness and ensure safe childbirth. In this way, women contributed not only to households, but to the broader health and prosperity of the community. Importantly, women were not seen as passive figures. Aztec mythology honored female deities such as Coatlicue, the Earth Mother, and Tlazolteotl, goddess of fertility and purification, reflecting women's sacred role in the cycle of life. Even in childbirth, women were seen as warriors, battling to bring life into the world. Those who died giving birth were honored like fallen soldiers, believed to accompany the sun on its journey through the sky. Thus, while Aztec society was patriarchal, it recognized the indispensable power of women. They were the silent backbone of the empire, sustaining it through labor, economy, and the sacred duty of motherhood. Without them, Tenochtitlan could never have thrived as it did. Women's roles extended beyond family and economy into the realm of religion and ritual, where they played significant and symbolic parts. The Aztec cosmos was a balance of male and female energies, and women, through their roles in ritual, embodied the creative and destructive forces of the universe. Though male priests dominated the highest temples, women were present in many layers of religious life, ensuring that the sacred duties of the community were fulfilled. Girls often received religious training in schools or temples. Some became priestesses dedicated to specific gods and goddesses, serving in ceremonies, maintaining temples, and keeping sacred fires alive. They took vows of chastity, fasting, and discipline, much like their male counterparts. In rituals to fertility deities such as Quetzal, goddess of love and flowers, women performed dances, songs, and offerings that connected the community to cycles of fertility and renewal. Women also played central roles in childbirth rituals, which were considered sacred battles. Midwives were not only medical practitioners, but also spiritual guides. They offered prayers, invoked protective deities, and framed childbirth as a warrior struggle. The mother, laboring in pain, was seen as a soldier fighting for life. If she died, her spirit was honored with the same reverence given to men who fell in battle, reinforcing the spiritual equality of life givers and life takers. In some festivals, women took part in dramatic rituals of impersonation, where chosen individuals represented goddesses before being sacrificed to complete the cycle of divine renewal. Such ceremonies were both terrifying and sacred, highlighting women's symbolic connection to fertility, life, and death. Even in household rituals, women's hands guided the sacred. Every hearth was an altar, and women who prepared food invoked the gods with offerings of maize and incense. Their daily actions were imbued with religious meaning, binding the domestic sphere to the cosmic order. Through religion, women were not marginalized, but honored as vital participants in sustaining the balance of the universe. Their rituals, prayers, and sacrifices reflected the Aztec belief that life itself was female and that the divine could never be complete without the power of women. Though most Aztec women lived ordinary lives as wives, mothers, and traders, history records examples of women who wielded extraordinary influence. Among the nobility, women could play powerful political roles. Daughters of rulers were often married into other dynasties, forging alliances that shaped the course of wars and politics. Noble women managed estates, oversaw tribute, and advised husbands or sons who held office. While they rarely ruled directly, their influence behind the scenes was undeniable. In extraordinary cases, women took on roles that blurred the boundaries between gendered expectations. Some joined warrior societies or took part in ritual combat, though these were exceptions. Symbolically, however, women were constantly associated with warfare through the sacred act of childbirth. Mothers who died giving birth were honored as mosawa, or women warriors, believed to escort the setting sun in the western sky, just as fallen male warriors escorted it in the east. This parallel highlighted the equal cosmic value of female sacrifice. Certain women also became cultural icons. Poets and singers expressed the fleeting nature of life, weaving themes of love, beauty, and mortality into verse. Some were remembered in codices and oral traditions for their wisdom or artistry, ensuring their voices carried across generations. The role of women was also crucial in moments of conquest. Melanchthon, La Malinche, though often viewed with controversy, exemplified the power women could wield in moments of history. As Cortés's interpreter and advisor, she became a bridge between two worlds, influencing diplomacy, alliances, and ultimately the fate of the empire. To some, she was a traitor. To others, a survivor who used her position to protect herself and her people. Her story reflects the complexity of women's roles in times of upheaval. In Aztec society, women were not rulers of empires, but they ruled households, guided rituals, and shaped alliances that sustained empires. Their symbolic and practical power ensured that they were never merely background figures, but essential actors in the grand drama of Aztec civilization. The economic engine of the Aztec Empire rested on a system of tribute that transformed conquered peoples into a steady source of wealth for Tenochtitlan. Every city-state that fell under Aztec rule was required to send regular payments of goods, labor, and captives. This tribute flowed like rivers into the capital, sustaining not only its rulers, but also its dazzling temples, armies, and festivals. Tribute lists recorded in codices reveal the astonishing variety of items demanded. Provinces delivered maize, beans, chili peppers, salt, and cotton cloth. Others provided cacao beans, prized as both currency and the basis for the sacred chocolate drink of the elite. Exotic goods came from distant lands. Feathers of quetzal birds, jaguar pelts, obsidian blades, and seashells from the coasts. Tribute was carefully measured. Thousands of cloaks, baskets of maize, or bundles of feathers, all tallied and recorded by scribes. This system not only enriched Tenochtitlan, but also reinforced imperial control. Tribute was a constant reminder of subjugation, a visible symbol of the empire's reach. Failure to deliver could bring swift punishment, as armies would march to enforce obedience. For subject peoples, tribute was a heavy burden, often sparking resentment. But for the Mexica elite, it was proof of divine favor, a demonstration that their empires stood at the center of the world. Markets also benefited from tribute. Goods arriving from provinces filled the stalls of Tlatelolco, ensuring a steady supply of food and luxuries. Tribute, in effect, redistributed wealth from across Mesoamerica into the heart of the valley. It allowed Tenochtitlan to support specialized artisans, priests, and scholars who did not farm but instead dedicated themselves to religion, science, and art. The tribute system was both economic and spiritual. Just as sacrifices fed the gods, tribute fed the empire. It sustained the grandeur of Tenochtitlan, making it one of the most prosperous cities in the world. Yet it also sowed the seeds of weakness. The resentment it generated among conquered peoples would later fuel alliances with the Spaniards, turning the economic foundation of empire into a cause of rebellion. If tribute was the empire's backbone, the marketplace was its beating heart. Every day, thousands of people crowded into the great market of Tlatelolco, described in awe by Spanish chroniclers. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a soldier with Cortés, compared it to markets in Europe, marveling at its scale, order, and abundance. He noted that more than 60,000 people might gather on a single day, trading everything from food to precious stones. The market was meticulously organized. Different sections were dedicated to specific goods. One for maize and beans, another for pottery, another for weapons, another for luxury items like jade and gold. Merchants displayed textiles, sandals, obsidian knives, tobacco, salt, honey, and medicinal herbs. There are even areas for pets and exotic animals. Judges patrol the market, settling disputes and punishing fraud, ensuring fairness and trust. The Aztecs had no metal coins, but they used multiple forms of currency. The most common were cacao beans, used to buy food and small goods. Cotton cloaks served as higher value currency, while pieces of obsidian, jade, or gold could be exchanged in larger trades. Barter was also common, especially for goods not easily standardized. This flexible system allowed markets to flourish with remarkable efficiency. Merchants were more than traders. They were vital cultural connectors. The Paktika, a guild of long-distance merchants, carried goods across Mesoamerica, often under disguise. They traded obsidian from the highlands, cacao from the tropical lowlands, turquoise from the north, and shells from the coasts. Along with goods, they brought news, intelligence, and sometimes acted as spies for the empire. Their work connected distant regions, weaving the Aztec world into a network of exchange. The marketplace was also social. Families gathered, gossip spread, and songs and dances filled the air. It was a place where the empire's diversity was visible, where one could see goods and faces from hundreds of different towns and provinces. To the Spaniards, Tlatelolco was proof of the Aztecs' sophistication. To the Aztecs, it was the daily rhythm of life, the stage where economy and culture came alive. Beyond tribute and local markets, the Aztecs were part of an extensive network of long-distance trade that stretched across Mesoamerica. Their merchants, the Paktika, were not simple traders but elite professionals who traveled great distances, often in secrecy, to bring back rare and valuable items. Their journeys connected the empire to distant cultures, ensuring a flow of resources and ideas that enriched Tenochtitlan. The Paktika were highly organized, operating in guild-like associations with strict rules. They undertook dangerous expeditions, sometimes lasting months, venturing into regions beyond Aztec political control. They carried goods on their backs or in caravans, trading obsidian, textiles, and crafted goods for tropical feathers, cacao, jade, and gold. Their knowledge of routes, languages, and customs made them invaluable not only as traders, but also as informants. Many acted as spies, reporting on potential enemies or allies to Aztec rulers. Trade routes linked the highlands of central Mexico with the Gulf Coast, the Maya lowlands, and beyond. From the Pacific coast came shells and exotic bird feathers. From the Mixtec regions came finely crafted jewelry. From the Tarascan lands, copper tools and ornaments. These goods flowed into Tenochtitlan, where artisans transformed them into treasures for nobles and temples. The wealth generated by trade supported cultural achievements. Feathers became stunning headdresses. Jade was carved into sacred masks. Cacao fueled elite banquets, and obsidian was crafted into razor-sharp weapons. In this way, trade was not merely economic but also cultural, shaping the splendor of Aztec art and ritual. What makes this remarkable is how integrated the Aztecs were into a larger world. They were not isolated, but part of a network that spanned diverse ecological zones, each contributing unique resources. This proto-globalization gave their empire both strength and vulnerability. It made Tenochtitlan a city of abundance, but it also meant dependence on trade routes that could be disrupted in times of war. In the end, the Spaniards marveled at this economic system. To them, the wealth of goods, the discipline of markets, and the reach of merchants proved that the Aztecs were not savages but a sophisticated civilization. Long-distance trade revealed the Aztec Empire as a hub of cultural and economic exchange, a society that, even before European arrival, was connected in ways that made it truly global in spirit. When Hernán Cortés and his conquistadors sailed westward, their eyes were not only on land, but on gold, the shimmering promise that had driven Spain's expansion across the Atlantic. The Spanish crown had already tasted riches from the Caribbean, where sugar plantations and enslaved labor generated wealth. But rumors of a powerful empire inland, overflowing with treasure, captured their imagination. For men like Cortés, These whispers were irresistible. The Spanish worldview was shaped by centuries of war during the Reconquista, the struggle to expel Muslim rulers from Iberia. That legacy instilled in them a militant faith, blending Christianity with conquest. Soldiers believed they fought under divine mandate, spreading the cross even as they sought personal enrichment. Cortez's men were not nobles, but adventurers, mercenaries, and fortune seekers. Men who gambled everything on the hope of glory in the New World. To them, the Aztecs represented both opportunity and justification. Spanish chronicles emphasized tales of temples dripping with gold, markets overflowing with wealth, and rituals of human sacrifice. These images confirmed for conquistadors that their mission was not only profitable, but holy. They saw themselves as instruments of God, tasked with saving pagan souls from damnation while filling their own coffers. Gold was their obsession. Every gift sent by Moctezuma, necklaces of jade, headdresses of feathers, discs of gold, only fueled their hunger. Bernal Diaz del Castillo later admitted that the Spaniards suffered from a disease of the heart that only gold could cure. The promise of riches justified risks, mutinies, and betrayals. When some men hesitated, Cortés famously burned his ships, leaving no choice but victory or death. Thus, from a Spanish perspective, the conquest was not merely war, but destiny. They believed they were chosen to bring civilization, to expand the empire of Spain, and to secure eternal salvation. Behind those lofty ideals, however, lay greed, ambition, and the ruthless drive for wealth. Gold and glory were the lodestars that guided them into the Valley of Mexico, setting them on a collision course with the Aztec world. While greed drove many conquistadors, faith provided the justification that made conquest feel righteous. Spain had recently completed its centuries-long Reconquista, crowning itself the defender of Christianity. The Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella had expelled Muslims and Jews, uniting their kingdom under one faith. Their successors carried this crusading spirit into the New World, seeing expansion as both political ambition and spiritual mission. For Cortés and his men, every step of the conquest was framed as a holy war. Priests accompanied the expedition, celebrating Mass, blessing banners, and urging natives to accept baptism. Crosses were planted where idols once stood, and churches rose over toppled temples. Cortés himself spoke of bringing the true faith to the people of Mexico, insisting that the Spaniards were liberators saving souls from demonic worship. Spanish chronicles often described Aztec rituals in grotesque detail. Hearts ripped from bodies, rivers of blood flowing down temple steps. These images horrified European audiences, but also served a political purpose. They justified conquest as divine necessity. If the Aztecs were committing such barbarities, then surely Spain had the duty to intervene, to end idolatry and replace it with Christianity. In this narrative, the cross became a weapon as powerful as the sword. Yet faith was also personal. Conquistadors believed that spreading Christianity would secure their own salvation. Many were younger sons of poor families with little hope of inheritance in Spain. In the New World, they saw a chance to win both earthly riches and heavenly reward. By conquering in the name of Christ, they believed their sins would be forgiven, their souls cleansed. Still, faith and greed often blurred. While priests preached conversion, soldiers demanded gold. While crosses were raised in triumph, treasures were melted into ingots to be shipped to Spain. The dual motives of the Spaniards, piety and profit, were inseparable. From their perspective, conquest was not a contradiction, but a holy enterprise. The spread of God's kingdom and the enrichment of Spain's empire, both achieved through the destruction of the Aztec world. Much of what the world knows about the conquest of the Aztecs comes from the pens of the Spaniards themselves. Chroniclers such as Hernán Cortés, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, and later missionaries like Fray Bernardino de Sahagun shaped the narrative that would dominate European understanding for centuries. Their writings reflected the Spanish perspective, part pride, part propaganda, and part justification. Cortés wrote a series of letters to King Charles V, known as the Cartas de Relation, in which he described the conquest in glowing terms. He portrayed himself as a loyal servant expanding Christendom, bringing order to a land of chaos, and delivering untold riches to the crown. His letters emphasized diplomacy, strategy, and divine favor, presenting himself as both commander and missionary. These accounts were designed to secure royal approval and protect him from accusations of treason for disobeying the governor of Cuba. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a foot soldier, offered a different view in his true history of the conquest of New Spain. Writing decades later, he sought to correct exaggerations and highlight the role of ordinary soldiers. His account vividly described markets, battles, and rituals, offering invaluable details. Yet even Diaz framed the conquest as a glorious enterprise, downplaying Spanish brutality and emphasizing the supposed barbarity of the Aztecs. Missionaries like Sahagun, meanwhile, documented Aztec culture in great detail, sometimes sympathetically, sometimes judgmentally. His monumental work, the Florentine Codex, preserved Nahua voices while framing their traditions as idolatry needing replacement. Spanish chroniclers thus both recorded and distorted Aztec history, shaping a legacy that was at once informative and biased. These writings cemented the Spanish perspective that the conquest was a triumph of civilization over savagery, of faith over heresy, of destiny over chance. Yet modern historians recognize the bias. While the chronicles provide precious insights, they must be read critically, balanced with archaeology and indigenous accounts. From the Spanish pen flowed the story of conquest, but it was a story told to justify empire, not to honor the fallen. For centuries after the conquest, the great city of Tenochtitlan was buried beneath the foundations of colonial Mexico City. Spanish rulers deliberately built their churches and palaces on top of Aztec temples, both as a practical use of stone and as a symbolic act of domination. The once glittering capital of the Mexica became invisible, reduced to memory and myth. But in the modern era, archaeology began to peel back the layers, revealing the grandeur of the city that had awed conquistadors. In the 18th century, early excavations uncovered fragments of Aztec monuments, including the famous calendar stone, often called the sunstone. This massive carved disc, depicting the cycles of time and cosmic order, became an icon of Aztec culture. It revealed the sophistication of Mexican astronomy and their obsession with the cycles of creation and destruction. For the first time, Europeans recognized that the Aztecs had not been mere savages, but thinkers with a complex worldview. The most dramatic discoveries came in the 20th century. In 1978, electrical workers stumbled upon a massive carved stone near the Metropolitan Cathedral in Mexico City. It turned out to be the Coyolxauhqui stone, depicting the dismembered moon goddess. This find led to systematic excavations that uncovered the remains of the Templo Mayor, the twin pyramid that had stood at the heart of Tenochtitlan. Archaeologists uncovered altars, offerings, sculptures, and the remains of ritual sacrifices, offering unparalleled insight into Aztec religion. Today, the Templo Mayor Museum stands beside the ruins, displaying artifacts ranging from obsidian knives to intricate jewelry. Excavations have revealed thousands of objects buried as offerings, jaguar skeletons, seashells from distant coasts, effigies of gods, each placed with ritual precision. These finds bring to life the spiritual and political significance of the sacred precinct. The rediscovery of Tenochtitlan has transformed how the world views the Aztecs. No longer remembered only through Spanish chronicles, the Mexica now speak through their own stones, carvings, and artifacts. Archaeology has restored their voice, reminding us that beneath modern Mexico City lies one of the greatest cities the world has ever known. While temples crumbled and cities were buried, another window into the Aztec world survived: the codices. These painted manuscripts, created on bark paper or deerskin, recorded history, rituals, astronomy, and tribute lists. Most were destroyed by Spanish friars, who saw them as works of idolatry. But a precious few survived, preserved in European libraries or by indigenous scribes who adapted to colonial rule. The codices are not books in a European sense. They are vibrant visual narratives filled with symbols, glyphs, and images that convey stories without alphabetic writing. They capture genealogies of rulers, accounts of battles, depictions of gods, and calendars of festivals. Through them, we glimpse how the Aztecs understood their world, not as a linear history, but as a cyclical cosmic drama. Notable examples include the Codex Mendoza, commissioned after the conquest to record Aztec tribute, society, and education. It shows not only lists of goods delivered to Tenochtitlan, but also illustrations of daily life. Children being disciplined, farmers tending fields, warriors capturing enemies. The Florentine Codex, compiled by Fray Bernardino de Sahagun with the help of Nahua informants, provides an encyclopedic record of Aztec culture, blending European observations with indigenous testimony. Modern scholars have devoted immense effort to decoding these manuscripts. They are not merely historical records, but works of art, rich in symbolism. The codices reveal how the Aztecs viewed themselves as participants in a divine cycle, their rituals essential to cosmic survival. They also provide critical counterpoints to Spanish chronicles, offering glimpses of the Aztec voice in their own imagery. The survival of these manuscripts is itself an act of resistance. Though many were lost to fire and zealotry, those that endure preserve memory across centuries. Today, they are housed in institutions in Mexico, Spain, and beyond, studied by historians, linguists, and indigenous communities. Each codex is a fragile thread connecting modern Mexico to its ancestral past, proof that while empires fall, memory endures. In recent decades, archaeology and scholarship have fueled not only academic knowledge, but also cultural revival. For the people of Mexico, rediscovering the Aztec past is not simply about history, it is about identity. The ruins of Tenochtitlan, the codices, and the symbols of Mexica culture have become cornerstones of national pride, shaping how modern Mexicans see themselves in relation to their ancestors. The most visible emblem is the Mexican flag, which bears the image of an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a serpent, the very sign that guided the Mexica to found Tenochtitlan. This symbol, once a prophecy of empire, is now a declaration of independence and resilience. It reminds every citizen that their nation stands on ancient foundations, born of struggle and destiny. Cultural revival extends beyond symbols. Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, is taught in schools and spoken by millions, keeping alive the voice of the Mexica. Traditional dances, festivals, and rituals, once suppressed by colonial authorities, are performed openly, blending indigenous and Christian elements in ways that honor both heritage and survival. Archaeological discoveries are celebrated not only as academic triumphs, but as collective victories of memory. In Mexico City, the ruins of the Templo Mayor stand as a dialogue between past and present. Skyscrapers rise above, but the stones of the Aztec temple remain, a reminder that history is layered, never erased. Tourists from around the world marvel at the ruins, but for Mexicans, they are sacred ground, a testament that their ancestors' greatness endures. Reclaiming Aztec identity also challenges colonial narratives. For centuries, the Aztecs were remembered mainly for human sacrifice, their achievements overshadowed by Spanish accounts. Today, Mexicans embrace a fuller picture. Engineers who built floating gardens, poets who sang of life's fragility, astronomers who charted the stars. By reclaiming this heritage, they transform a story of conquest into a story of survival. Thus, modern archaeology is not just about the past. It is about the present and the future. The rediscovery of the Aztecs empowers their descendants, reminding them that while empires fall, cultures adapt, endure, and rise again. In Aztec society, war was not just politics, it was a sacred duty. Every man was expected to serve as a warrior, and from an early age boys were trained to embrace this destiny. Education in the Telpacali, the school for commoners, revolved around discipline, endurance, and combat. From carrying heavy loads to learning to march long distances barefoot, young men were hardened to endure the rigors of war. Nobles studied in the Kalmukak, where they learned not only the art of battle, but also the rituals and strategies necessary for commanding armies. A warrior's life was marked by initiation. Boys joined mock battles, learned to use wooden swords and shields, and were taught that bravery mattered more than survival. The true goal was not to kill enemies, but to capture them alive, for captives were the lifeblood of Aztec ritual. To seize a prisoner in combat was a mark of honor, proof of skill, and a step towards social advancement. As they matured, warriors could rise through the ranks. Those who captured multiple enemies gained the right to wear elaborate costumes and join elite orders, such as the Jaguar Warriors and Eagle Warriors. These orders were more than military units. They were religious brotherhoods, embodying the power of fierce animals believed to channel divine energy. Dressed in jaguar skins or eagle feathers, these warriors inspired fear and commanded respect. War was also deeply ritualized. Before campaigns, priests performed ceremonies to secure divine favor, and warriors fasted or offered their own blood in sacrifice. Each battle was seen as a cosmic reenactment of the struggle between gods and chaos. To fight was to sustain the universe, to ensure the sun would rise again. Victory was not merely territorial, it was spiritual. Thus, from childhood to battlefield, the warrior's path was central to Aztec identity. War was a means of expansion, tribute, and power, but it was also a sacred calling. Every boy grew up knowing that his courage on the battlefield could define his destiny, elevate his family, and even determine his place in the afterlife. The Aztec approach to warfare combined discipline, strategy, and symbolic meaning. Battles were not chaotic skirmishes, but carefully planned campaigns. Leaders sent envoys to enemy cities, offering terms of surrender before war. If rejected, armies marched out with banners, drums, and priests carrying sacred idols. The goal was not annihilation, but domination. To win tribute, secure captives, and reinforce the empire's supremacy. Weapons reflected this dual purpose. The macuahuitl, a wooden sword edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades, could inflict devastating wounds. Spears, bows, and atlatls, spear throwers, extended reach, while shields and cotton armor provided protection. Yet warriors often sought to subdue rather than kill, striking to disable enemies for capture. This focus distinguished Aztec warfare from European models, where killing was paramount. One of the most unique aspects of Aztec strategy was the Zaquiyotl, or flowery wars. These were ritualized conflicts fought not for territory, but for captives destined for sacrifice. The Aztecs and their rivals, such as the Tlaxcalans, agreed to meet in battle, each seeking honor and prisoners. These wars served multiple purposes. They trained young warriors, reinforced religious obligations, and maintained a constant supply of sacrificial victims. For the Aztecs, the flowery wars symbolized the intertwining of politics, religion, and combat. Organization was key. Armies marched in divisions, each led by experienced commanders. Signals were given by conch shells and drums, coordinating attacks across the battlefield. Scouts provided intelligence, while supply lines ensured food and weapons reached the front. Despite lacking horses or advanced metallurgy, Aztec armies were formidable, relying on discipline, sheer numbers, and the psychological impact of their elaborate costumes and rituals. The flowery wars also reveal the paradox of Aztec power. While they strengthened warriors and satisfied religious duty, they also prolonged conflict with neighboring states. Enemies like the Tlaxcalans, hardened by these ritual wars, later allied with Cortés, turning ritual rivalry into political revenge. What had once been sacred contests became stepping stones toward the empire's downfall. Aztec warfare left a legacy that extended beyond the battlefield. It shaped society, defined identity, and influenced the very structure of the empire. Warriors were heroes, but also role models, embodying the ideals of discipline, courage, and devotion to the gods. Their achievements determined their social mobility. A commoner who captured multiple enemies could rise into the nobility, earn land, and secure prestige for his family. In this way, warfare acted as a ladder of opportunity. The spiritual dimension of combat gave warriors a special place in the afterlife. Men who died in battle or were sacrificed as captives were believed to accompany the sun, rising each morning in glory before transforming into hummingbirds or butterflies. This belief gave warfare a profound meaning. Death was not the end, but a passage to eternal honor. Women who died in childbirth shared this same fate, reinforcing the idea that both warriors and mothers fought equally sacred battles. Warfare also shaped the empire's expansion. Conquered territories became tributaries, supplying food, goods, and captives to the capital. Tribute lists and imperial codices reveal the wealth drawn from these campaigns. Cotton, cacao, feathers, and slaves, all feeding the splendor of Tenochtitlan. War was thus the lifeblood of empire, both materially and spiritually. Yet the same system that sustained the empire also weakened it. By ruling through fear and tribute, the Aztecs alienated many subject peoples. When the Spaniards arrived, these resentments boiled over, turning former enemies into allies of conquest. The very structure of Aztec warfare, focused on capture, ritual, and intimidation, proved vulnerable against European strategies of total war, horses, and firearms. Still, the legacy of Aztec warfare endures. Modern Mexico remembers the warrior orders, the eagle and jaguar knights, as symbols of bravery and cultural pride. Archaeological discoveries of weapons, armor, and depictions of battle remind us that the Aztecs were not merely victims of conquest, but fierce fighters who defended their world until the bitter end. Their warfare was not only a tool of empire, but a reflection of their worldview. A cosmic struggle where every battle echoed the eternal war between gods and darkness. The Aztecs were not only warriors and rulers, but also skilled observers of the heavens. Their science was deeply tied to religion, blending empirical knowledge with spiritual meaning. Central to their worldview was the concept of time, measured through a complex system of calendars that guided every aspect of life, from planting crops to waging war, from festivals to coronations. They used two main calendars: the Tanalpwali, a 260-day ritual calendar, structured religious ceremonies and divination. Each day combined one of 20-day signs, like jaguar, wind, or reed, with a number from 1 to 13, producing a repeating cycle that shaped destinies. Priests used this calendar to interpret omens, determine auspicious days for marriage or war, and align human actions with cosmic balance. The second was the Zyapowali, a 365-day solar calendar divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus 5 unlucky days. This calendar tracked the agricultural cycle: when to plant maize, when to harvest, when to perform rain ceremonies. Together, the two calendars formed a 52-year cycle, the century of Aztec time. At the end of each cycle, the Aztecs performed the new fire ceremony, extinguishing all fires and waiting in fearful silence until priests kindled a new flame atop a sacred mountain. This ritual symbolized the renewal of the cosmos, the assurance that the sun would continue to rise. The calendar stone, or sunstone, embodies this mastery of time. Carved with intricate symbols, it represents the cycles of creation and destruction, the reigns of previous suns, and the face of Tonatiuh, the sun god. It is both scientific and sacred, showing that for the Aztecs, astronomy was not cold observation, but a way of maintaining harmony with the universe. Their knowledge of celestial movements was advanced. They tracked the sun, moon, and Venus with remarkable precision. Venus, associated with Quetzalcoatl, was especially important for warfare and ritual. Priests could predict eclipses and align temples with solstices, turning cities into cosmic landscapes. For the Aztecs, science and religion were inseparable. The stars were not distant lights, but divine forces shaping human destiny. While the Spaniards often dismissed the Aztecs as primitive, their medical practices reveal a sophisticated understanding of the human body and natural remedies. Aztec medicine combined practical knowledge with spiritual belief, seeing illness as both a physical imbalance and a disruption of cosmic harmony. Healers, midwives, and herbalists formed an essential part of society, treating common ailments and guiding patients through life's critical stages. The Aztecs relied heavily on the natural world. Their empire encompassed diverse climates, from highlands to tropical lowlands, giving access to hundreds of medicinal plants. They used cacao for energy, chili peppers for circulation, aloe for burns, willow bark for pain relief, and datura for anesthesia in rituals or surgery. Flowers, roots, and herbs were meticulously cataloged, many of which modern science still recognizes for their medicinal properties. Midwives played a crucial role in childbirth. They were both healers and spiritual guides, performing rituals to protect mother and child, offering herbal remedies for pain, and invoking deities like Tlazolteotl for safe delivery. Childbirth was seen as a battle, and midwives were warriors in their own right, guiding women through the sacred struggle of life-giving. Surgery, too, was practiced. Healers could set broken bones, suture wounds with hair or plant fibers, and drain abscesses. They employed obsidian blades, sharper than steel, for precise cutting. Sweat baths, or temazcales, provided both physical healing and spiritual purification, using steam and herbs to cleanse the body and soul. Spiritual causes of illness were also recognized. Sorcery, curses, or divine displeasure could bring disease. In such cases, healers used rituals, prayers, and offerings to restore balance. This holistic approach integrated body, mind, and spirit, reflecting the Aztec belief that health was cosmic harmony embodied. Spanish chroniclers, though skeptical, recorded Aztec medical knowledge with fascination. Some remedies were adopted into European practice, while others vanished under colonial suppression. Yet modern researchers now rediscover their value, proving that the Aztecs were not merely warriors but skilled practitioners of the healing arts. Beyond calendars and medicine, Aztec science shone in their engineering and environmental management. Building a thriving empire on the islands of Lake Texcoco demanded ingenuity, and the Aztecs met the challenge with creativity that astonished the Spaniards. Tenochtitlan itself was a marvel of engineering, a city of canals, causeways, and aqueducts that rivaled Venice in scale and sophistication. The most remarkable achievement was the chinampas, or floating gardens. These man-made islands were created by layering mud, vegetation, and stakes in the shallow lake, producing fertile plots that yielded multiple harvests a year. Chinampas provided maize, beans, squash, and flowers, sustaining the vast population of the capital. They were so efficient that Spanish observers called them the Gardens of Paradise. Modern agricultural scientists still admire chinampas as an early model of sustainable farming. Water management was equally advanced. The Aztecs built aqueducts to bring fresh water from springs to the city, ensuring clean supply despite the brackish lake. They constructed dikes to control flooding and separate fresh from salt water. During the rainy season, they drained excess water. In drought, they conserved it. Such engineering reflected deep understanding of hydrology and environmental balance. Urban planning showcased scientific precision. The city was divided into districts with organized streets, temples, and marketplaces. Causeways connected the island to the mainland, with drawbridges that could be raised for defense. Canoes served as transportation, turning the city into a bustling waterborne metropolis. Astronomical knowledge shaped architecture. Temples were aligned with solstices and equinoxes, transforming buildings into cosmic instruments that connected the city with the heavens. Science, religion, and engineering worked together to create a city that was both functional and symbolic, a living reflection of the Aztec cosmos. The Spaniards, though conquerors, could not hide their amazement. Bernal Diaz admitted that upon seeing Tenochtitlan, "We were astounded and said that it was like the enchantments, for we had never seen such things before." The science of survival had produced not just a city, but a masterpiece, proving that the Aztecs were masters of innovation, adaptation, and vision. For the Aztecs, art was never merely decorative. It was sacred. Every sculpture, mosaic, and feathered headdress carried layers of religious and cosmic meaning. To create art was to participate in the divine order, giving form to the forces that shaped the universe. Art was not separate from life. It was woven into temples, clothing, rituals, and everyday objects, making the empire itself a living gallery. Stone carving was among their greatest achievements. Artists sculpted gods and goddesses in basalt and andesite, producing images that embodied divine presence. The colossal statue of Coatlicue, the earth goddess with a skirt of serpents, captures both the beauty and terror of creation. Her fangs and claws symbolize fertility as well as death, showing the duality of existence. Similarly, the calendar stone was not only an astronomical tool, but also a masterpiece of cosmic art, mapping time with intricate designs. Featherwork stood at the pinnacle of Aztec artistry. Artisans known as Amantica created dazzling mosaics using feathers of quetzal, hummingbird, and parrot. These works shimmered with iridescence, adorning shields, fans, and ceremonial costumes. The most famous example, the feathered headdress attributed to Moctezuma, symbolizes the splendor of Aztec art, fragile, luminous, and divine. Everyday objects, too, carried artistry. Pottery bore intricate designs, obsidian knives were polished to mirror-like perfection, and textiles displayed elaborate patterns. Even utilitarian items reflected a culture where beauty was inseparable from function. Markets thrived with artistic goods, ensuring that art was accessible to nobles and commoners alike. Importantly, art was communal. Artisans belonged to guilds, passing skills through generations. Their work was commissioned by nobles or temples, but also created for trade and household use. Through their hands, the cosmos was rendered visible, shaping how people understood gods, nature, and themselves. In the Aztec world, art was not a luxury, it was necessity. It affirmed identity, celebrated the gods, and transformed the material world into a reflection of the sacred. In every sculpture, in every feather, the Aztecs expressed their philosophy, that beauty was truth, and truth was divine order embodied. If stone and feather expressed the divine in physical form, poetry and song revealed the soul of the Aztecs. The Mexica called their poetry in Xochitl, in Cuicatl, flower and song. This phrase captured their belief that truth was best expressed through metaphor, beauty, and rhythm. Poetry was not mere entertainment, but philosophy in motion, a way of grappling with life's fragility and the eternal cycle of creation and destruction. The most famous poet king was Nezahualcóyotl of Texcoco, a contemporary and ally of the Mexica. His verses, preserved through oral tradition and later recorded in codices, speak of the fleeting nature of life. Not forever on earth, only a little while here. Even jade shatters, even gold breaks, even Quetzal feathers tear. These lines reflect a profound awareness of mortality, a reminder that even the most precious things are impermanent. Yet through poetry, beauty endures. Aztec poetry often explored themes of love, war, nature, and divinity. Some verses honored gods, others described battles, while many meditated on the sadness of existence. They reveal a society that, though often remembered for sacrifice, was deeply contemplative. The act of singing or reciting poetry was itself sacred, a way of aligning the human voice with cosmic harmony. Music accompanied poetry, performed with drums, flutes, rattles, and shell trumpets. Dances turned words into motion, creating performances that united community, art, and ritual. Nobles gathered in courts to hear singers, while festivals filled the streets with collective song. Poetry was both elite and popular, intellectual and communal. Spanish missionaries, though hostile to Aztec religion, were astonished by the sophistication of their verse. Some preserved poems in Latin script, ensuring their survival. Today, these works offer a rare glimpse of Aztec thought in their own words. They remind us that beneath the image of warriors and sacrifices was a people who cherished beauty, who sought truth through metaphor, and who used flowers and songs to speak of eternity. In poetry, the Aztecs left a voice that conquest could not silence. Their verses still resonate, carrying across centuries the melancholy wisdom of a people who knew that life was brief, but beauty eternal. Beyond art and poetry, the Aztecs developed a rich philosophy that wrestled with the deepest questions of existence. Nahuatl thinkers, known as Tlamatanaim, knowers of things, sought to understand the nature of reality, the purpose of life, and the path to truth. Their philosophy was not written in books like in Europe, but expressed through poetry, speeches, and teachings, blending intellectual inquiry with spirituality. Central to Aztec philosophy was the concept of Teotl. This was the divine energy that permeated everything: gods, humans, nature, and the cosmos itself. Teotl was not a distant deity, but the living force of existence, constantly in motion, creating and destroying. Life for the Aztecs was about aligning with Teotl, living in balance with its rhythms. Another key idea was balance and duality. The Aztecs saw the world as composed of opposites: life and death, light and darkness, order and chaos. Rather than choosing one side, they sought harmony between them. This worldview shaped their rituals of sacrifice, their art, and their ethics. Sacrifice, however shocking to outsiders, was understood as maintaining balance, feeding the sun so that life could continue. The philosophers also emphasized the ephemeral nature of life. Human existence was compared to flowers that bloom and wither, or to paintings that fade with time. This awareness fostered humility and a search for meaning. True wisdom, they taught, was not in wealth or power, but in creating beauty, speaking truth, and living honorably in harmony with others and the cosmos. Education reflected these ideas. Students memorized proverbs, poems, and speeches that conveyed philosophical lessons. Fathers and mothers instructed children with metaphors. Life is slippery, like a path on a mountain ridge. Walk carefully, so you do not fall on either side. Such teachings show a people deeply concerned with ethics, morality, and the art of living well. Aztec philosophy stands as a reminder that this civilization was not only warriors and rulers, but also thinkers and seekers of truth. Their reflections on balance, duality, and mortality remain strikingly relevant, offering wisdom that transcends centuries. They remind us that every civilization, no matter how distant, grapples with the same eternal questions. What is life? What is truth? What is our place in the cosmos? At the heart of the Aztec agricultural system lay one of the most ingenious inventions of the pre-Columbian world, the chinampas, or floating gardens. Built in the shallow waters of Lake Texcoco, these rectangular plots of fertile land transformed marshy lagoons into highly productive farmland. They were not literal rafts, but artificial islands, created by driving wooden stakes into the lake bed, weaving them with reeds, and piling on mud, silt, and vegetation. Over time, the plots became permanent, anchored by trees like willows planted at their corners. Chinampas were marvels of efficiency. Each plot could yield multiple harvests per year, producing maize, beans, squash, chili peppers, tomatoes, and amaranth. The soil was naturally replenished by lake sediment, making fertilizers unnecessary. Irrigation came from the surrounding canals, where farmers could easily transport crops by canoe to the markets of Tenochtitlan. This system fed the city's massive population, estimated at over 200,000, making it one of the most densely populated urban centers in the world. The Chinampas were not just farms. They were ecological masterpieces. They created a symbiotic relationship between land and water, balancing agriculture with aquatic ecosystems. Fish, waterfowl, and frogs thrived in the canals, supplementing the Aztec diet. Farmers managed pests with natural methods, using frogs and birds to control insects. In modern terms, the Chinampas were a model of sustainable agriculture, centuries ahead of their time. Spanish conquistadors marveled at these gardens, comparing them to floating fields of paradise. Bernal Diaz del Castillo described them as gardens that seemed to be afloat, filled with maize, vegetables, and flowers. Today, remnants of chinampas still survive in Xochimilco, a district of Mexico City, where they continue to demonstrate the ingenuity of Aztec farmers. The chinampas symbolized more than survival. They were an expression of Aztec philosophy, harmony with nature, innovation in adversity, and the belief that humans could create abundance through balance with the environment. They were the foundation of the empire's prosperity, sustaining both its people and its splendor. The Aztec diet was built on the three sisters of Mesoamerican agriculture: maize, beans, and squash. These crops complemented each other nutritionally, providing carbohydrates, protein, and essential vitamins. Maize, in particular, was the sacred heart of Aztec life. It was more than food, it was identity. Myths told that humans were created from maize dough, linking the crop to the very essence of humanity. Maize was prepared in countless forms: tortillas, tamales, atole, a hot maize drink, and pozole, a maize stew. The process of nixtamalization, soaking maize in lime water, released essential nutrients, preventing malnutrition and giving the Aztecs remarkable dietary resilience. Beans were boiled or stewed with chili, while squash provided seeds, flesh, and blossoms for meals. Together, these staples sustained the empire. But Aztec cuisine extended far beyond the basics. Chili peppers added spice to almost every dish, while tomatoes, avocados, and amaranth enriched the diet. Cacao beans were ground into a bitter, frothy drink flavored with chili, honey, or vanilla, an elite beverage associated with warriors and nobles. For protein, the Aztecs relied on turkey, duck, fish, frogs, and even insects such as grasshoppers and maguey worms, considered delicacies. Markets displayed an astonishing variety of foods. Vendors sold tamales wrapped in maize husks, fresh fruits like prickly pears and guavas, and sweets made from honey and amaranth seeds. Feasts for nobles included exotic dishes such as deer or rabbit, while commoners ate simpler meals of maize and beans. The diet was balanced, diverse, and deeply connected to the land's bounty. Food was also spiritual. Maize dough was offered in rituals, cacao was consumed in ceremonies, and banquets were tied to festivals honoring gods. Eating was not merely survival, but communion with the divine. Every meal reinforced the belief that humans lived in a reciprocal relationship with the gods and the earth. In this way, Aztec cuisine reveals both practicality and philosophy, a diet rich in variety, sustained by ingenious agriculture, and infused with cosmic meaning that in Aztec society, food was never just nourishment. It was social glue and spiritual offering. Meals reinforced status, celebrated community, and connected people to the gods. The way food was prepared, shared, and consumed reflected the empire's hierarchy and its worldview. For commoners, meals were simple but communal. Families gathered around tamales or tortillas with beans and chili, eaten with hands, not utensils. Hospitality was highly valued. Guests were offered food as a sign of respect. Markets provided variety, but access to certain foods, like cacao or turkey, was limited by class. The diet thus reflected social divisions, with luxury reserved for nobles and warriors. For the elite, feasting was a political tool. Banquets hosted by rulers like Moctezuma dazzled guests with dozens of dishes, exotic ingredients, and elaborate presentations. Cortés described Moctezuma's meals as involving hundreds of plates, with servants bringing turkeys, fish, fruits, and chocolate drinks in golden goblets. Such feasts were demonstrations of wealth and power, reinforcing the ruler's divine status. Food was central to ritual as well. During festivals, offerings of tamales, maize dough, and cacao were made to the gods. In some ceremonies, sacrificial victims were symbolically transformed into sacred food, their flesh consumed by priests in acts of ritual communion. These practices, shocking to outsiders, reflected the Aztec belief that sustenance was reciprocal. Humans fed the gods just as the gods fed humans with sun and rain. Even daily cooking carried sacred weight. Women preparing tortillas offered prayers, acknowledging the divine gift of maize. The hearth was not merely a cooking place, but a sacred center of the household, linked to domestic gods. In this way, every act of eating reinforced cosmic balance. The legacy of Aztec food culture endures today. Modern Mexican cuisine, tortillas, tamales, chocolate, chili sauces, directly descend from Aztec traditions. What was once ritual sustenance has become national identity, celebrated across the world. Through food, the Aztecs live on, nourishing not only bodies, but also the memory of a civilization that understood meals as sacred acts of community and cosmos. Though the Aztec Empire fell in 1521, its language, traditions, and spirits survived conquest and colonization. Central to this endurance is Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica, which remains spoken by over 1 million people today. It is a living testament to resilience, carrying words, stories, and knowledge across centuries. Even in modern Spanish and English, Nahuatl has left its mark. Chocolate, tomato, avocado, coyote, and chili are all gifts of Aztec vocabulary to the world. The persistence of Nahuatl reflects the deep-rooted survival of Aztec culture. Despite the suppression of temples and rituals, traditions adapted under colonial rule. Festivals once tied to Aztec gods merged with Catholic celebrations, creating hybrid practices that endure to this day. The Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, now famous worldwide, echoes pre-Hispanic rituals honoring ancestors with altars, food, and offerings. This continuity shows how Aztec spirituality was never erased, only reshaped. Artistic traditions also lived on. Weaving, pottery, and featherwork survived by adapting to colonial markets, while still carrying indigenous patterns and symbolism. Music and dance, once performed in temple courtyards, continued in village festivals, blending drums and flutes with Spanish instruments. Oral traditions preserved myths and histories, ensuring that stories of gods, warriors, and poets were passed down long after the empire's fall. Even agriculture retained Aztec ingenuity. In regions like Xochimilco, remnants of chinampas are still cultivated, proving the sustainability of ancient farming methods. Herbal medicine, rooted in Aztec knowledge, continues in rural communities, demonstrating how science and healing traditions endured beyond colonial suppression. Most importantly, identity survived. For many indigenous communities, being Nahua means carrying forward not only language, but also worldview, the belief in balance, respect for nature, and the sanctity of community. The survival of these traditions affirms that while empires can fall, cultures endure. In modern Mexico, Nahuatl-speaking communities remind the nation and the world that the Aztecs are not just a chapter in history. They are ancestors whose voices still echo, whose traditions still live, and whose legacy continues to shape the present. One of the most striking aspects of Aztec legacy is how deeply it is woven into the very identity of modern Mexico. At the heart of the Mexican flag lies an image drawn directly from Aztec myth, an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a serpent. This was the prophecy that guided the Mexica to found Tenochtitlan, the city that became the jewel of their empire. Today, it is the emblem of an entire nation. When Mexico gained independence from Spain in the early 19th century, leaders sought symbols that would unite a diverse people under a shared identity. They turned to the Aztec past, reclaiming it not as a story of defeat, but as one of resilience and destiny. The eagle on the cactus became a symbol of rebirth, proof that out of conquest and colonization, a proud nation could rise again. This symbolism extends beyond the flag. Streets, plazas, and monuments across Mexico bear names of Aztec rulers and warriors. Moctezuma, Cuauhtémoc, Nezahualcóyotl. Statues of Aztec leaders stand in city centers, celebrated as heroes of indigenous pride. Even the name Mexico itself derives from the Mexica, the Aztec people who once ruled the valley. Every time the nation speaks its name, it honors its Aztec heritage. Cultural pride also finds expression in art and literature. Painters like Diego Rivera filled murals with images of Aztec warriors, temples, and farmers, reclaiming indigenous heritage as central to Mexican identity. Writers and poets revisited Aztec philosophy, celebrating its wisdom about balance, mortality, and beauty. In music, dance, and theater, echoes of Aztec ritual continue, reimagined for modern audiences. For Mexicans, these symbols are more than history. They are living emblems of nationhood. The eagle, cactus, and serpent remind citizens of their ancestors' strength and resilience, a story that transcends conquest. The Aztecs, once portrayed as victims, now stand as cultural heroes, embodying the endurance and pride of a people who refuse to vanish. Thus, the Aztec legacy is not a relic of the past, but a foundation of modern Mexico. It lives in every flag unfurled, every anthem sung, and every declaration of national identity. Beyond Mexico, the legacy of the Aztecs resonates globally. Their achievements in agriculture, cuisine, art, and philosophy have spread far beyond the Valley of Mexico, influencing cultures and societies around the world. Chocolate, once a sacred Aztec drink reserved for nobles and warriors, is now a global obsession, enjoyed by billions daily. Tomatoes, chili peppers, and avocados, staples of Aztec cuisine, have become essential ingredients in kitchens across continents. In this way, Aztec contributions continue to nourish the world. Archaeology and scholarship have also brought the Aztecs to global attention. The discovery of the Sunstone, the excavation of the Templo Mayor, and the study of codices have fascinated historians, artists, and travelers alike. Museums in Mexico City, Madrid, London, and beyond display Aztec artifacts, drawing millions of visitors each year. These exhibitions not only showcase Aztec artistry, but also challenge stereotypes, presenting the Mexica as thinkers, engineers, and poets, not merely warriors of sacrifice. Philosophically, Aztec reflections on balance, duality, and the fleeting nature of life resonate with modern audiences. Their poetry, preserved across centuries, speaks to universal human concerns, the brevity of existence, the search for beauty, and the struggle for meaning. In an age of ecological crisis, their emphasis on harmony with nature finds renewed relevance, reminding us of ancient wisdom that modern societies too often ignore. For indigenous communities across the Americas, the Aztec legacy is a source of pride and inspiration. It affirms that their ancestors were builders of great civilizations, whose contributions continue to shape the world. For Mexico, it is a foundation of identity. For the world, it is a testament to the diversity of human achievement. The Aztecs may have fallen to conquest, but their legacy endures in every tortilla, every poem, every scientific rediscovery of chinampas, and every Mexican flag raised high. Their story is one of tragedy and triumph, of destruction and resilience, of loss and survival. It reminds us that civilizations never truly vanish. They live on in the memory, culture, and identity of those who inherit their spirit. Today, you've walked through the rise and fall of the Aztec Empire. You've heard how they built floating gardens to feed millions, how warriors fought not only with obsidian blades, but with cosmic purpose, how poetry and philosophy revealed their wisdom, and how Spanish conquest brought both tragedy and transformation. We've seen how disease, betrayal, and steel broke an empire, but also how language, culture, and spirit endured. The Aztecs remind us of the fragility of power, the resilience of people, and the timeless struggle to find balance in a world of chaos. This is the moral of their story. Civilizations may fall, but their voices echo forever. Thank you for joining me on this journey here on History Teller YT. If this story moved you, remember, there are countless more waiting to be told. Subscribe, stay connected, and return again as we uncover the hidden histories that shaped our world. Until then, let the memory of the Aztecs remind us, though time may pass, history still speaks.